Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear statements made by various people who were either in the tower or living close to the tower on the night of the fire. Yes, Mr. Rawat.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. As you've just indicated, we are going to be putting into the record today a number of statements from people who were either survivors or residents of the tower or bereaved, but also in particular residents of the walkways connected to the tower. And I will begin this morning dealing with statements from residents of Grenfell Walk. The inquiry has received 8 statements from residents of Grenfell Walk, which I will be putting into the record today. I will summarise key aspects of those statements, although in one particular case I intend to read part of the statement out. Before I begin to do so, Mr. Chairman, I should say in relation to this set of statements, but also in relation to all of the statements that we're reading in this morning, that the statements are admitted into the inquiry's record in their entirety and will be considered as such as part of the evidence before the inquiry.
Yes, thank you.
Can I begin then with the statement of Hernn Chewbacca, which is at IWS 6016. That's, if we go to page 20 of the statement, we see that the statement is signed with a statement of truth and dated the 4th of April 2018. The statement includes an exhibit which is HC1 and which has the same IWS reference. And to give some context to this statement, Mrs. Chewbacca had moved into a maisonette flat in Grenfell Walk in 2006 with her husband, but has herself lived in the area since 1993. And at the time of the fire, she and her husband were living in Grenfell Walk. On the evening of the fire, Mrs. Chewbacca's husband, Hisham, returned home at about 10 to 1 in the morning and told his wife that something was going on outside. They noticed fire engines outside. Mr. Chewbacca and the couple's daughter went out to find out what was happening. Mrs. Chewbacca, while still at home, was able to learn more of what was happening in the tower from a telephone call received from her husband once outside, and also Snapchat videos which her daughter circulated. After evacuating her own flat, Mrs. Chewbacca took steps to alert her neighbours to the fire. And if I could read some parts of Mrs. Chewbacca's statement.
Yes, thank you.
Can I take you, Mr. Chairman, to paragraph 18, which is at page 5 in the statement. If we begin with paragraph 18, I phoned my friend Fawzia al-Wahhabi, who lived in the tower. I can see from my phone billing that I called her at 1:10. She wasn't answering. I phoned maybe 3 or 4 times and then tried her daughter Nurhuda al-Wahhabi, who is 15 years old and my daughter's best friend. She didn't answer at first, but she answered, I think, the second time I tried to call. When she answered the call, I could tell that I had woken her up. I told her there's a fire in the building. I tried to do this calmly so as not to scare her. She said, "Oh, okay." And from the way she said it, I could tell that she had been deeply asleep when I called her, and she was still drowsy. So I repeated, "No, there's a fire in the building and you need to get out." She said, "No, it's okay, it's downstairs." I don't know how she knew that. I told her to go and wake her mother up and let her make the decision whether to stay or leave. She said, okay, I'll go to her," and put the phone down. I was still in the kitchen. I went downstairs to the front door. I saw my daughter outside the tower on the phone. She told me afterwards that she had been on the phone to Nurhuda. I could see her on the green outside the tower because I had worked out from Snapchat about where she was. She walked up the stairs onto the walkway of Grenfell Walk towards our flat. I shouted down to her, "Is Dad okay?" She said, "No, things are falling from the building." I told her to come upstairs quickly. I phoned Fawzia again, but there was still no answer. I think I also phoned Hisham at this time. I still could not see the fire from my home because it was on the other side. But it was around this time that I could see reflections of the fire on other parts of the estate, like the academy and the sports centre. I phoned my brother Ilyas. He told me that he was outside, but that he was okay. I don't know where outside the tower he was exactly. I thought, okay, he's fine. I don't have to worry about him. I phoned him because I knew he had friends in the tower and thought he might be in there. And if I move forward in the statement to paragraph 22 and continue from there, I told, and the name redacted is the name of Mrs. Chewbacca's daughter, to wake her brother up and to tell him to get dressed. I told her that I would take them to Nanny, my mother's house. I knew from Snapchat and the reaction of people that the situation was very serious and the fire was spreading. I needed to get the children away. She lives about 10 minutes walk up the road. I was thinking about all the different relatives who were there, my brother, my husband, and my children. I went and got the baby into a jacket and got the pram out. He was still sleeping. I went upstairs and grabbed some nappies and a bottle. My husband called me. I asked him, is Ilyas with you? He said yes. My husband is quite a calm man, but now there was panic in his voice. He said that the fire was going to get massive. It was going to get really big. He told me to call and tell people. I was in the kitchen at that time. I looked at the window and I could see the reflection of the orange flames in the glass. Underneath the tower is a new school, and I could see the glass of its windows lighting up orange with the reflection of the flames. I pulled back the net curtains on my kitchen window to see better. I felt completely panicked. I threw the milk into the bag and went downstairs to my children. My daughter was explaining what was happening to her brother. I put the plastic rain cover down over the baby's pram to protect him from smoke. We left the flat. The name redacted here is that of another of Mrs. Chewbacca's children. It's her son. Asked me to get the photo of his late grandfather for him and his PlayStation. I told him that I would get them for him later. I told my daughter to take my son and the baby downstairs. Once we were outside the flat, I could see the extent of it. As we walked along the landing, I could see more of the tower. I could see flames shooting out of the tower about 3/4 of the way up. I had never seen such a big flame. It was scary. Our whole estate was lit up orange. The school was lit up orange. There were about 20 people stood outside the tower near the entrance, and no one was on the walk at that time. I saw 2 girls on Hurstway Walk. Their names are redacted, and she identifies them as friends of her daughter, and then continues. They were draped in a blanket or a dressing gown. They said they had seen my daughter's Snapchat videos and went to have a look. I started shouting, "Get out of the building," at Grenfell Tower. I'm no good at distances, but I think it is about 40 meters away. There was no one at the windows. Then I saw my neighbour Sharon at her window, 2 floors above me in the tower. She said, "What's happening, love?" I told her, "Your building's on fire and you need to get out." She went away. I could see others coming to the windows. 10 to 20 seconds later, Sharon returned to her window. She said, "They won't let me out." I asked her, "What do you mean?" She said, "They won't let us out." I assumed she meant firefighters. I'd not seen any police by this time. I said, "Just get out. Head out of there, get out, get the hell out." My instinct was that they should just get out of Grenfell Tower. At that time, quite a few residents of the tower started coming to their windows. I can't describe the smoke because it was dark outside. The estate was only lit by the fire. I can't remember what colour it was. I can only remember seeing smoke. I could hear a lot of shouting now, and I could see people coming out of the blocks. I got the kids inside and called my husband. I told him to come back because I wanted to take the children to my mum's. He said no, he was trying to help. I told him to come back and he said, I'm doing something. After I asked him again, he said, "All right, I'll come," and hung up. I found out later that he'd been involved in the rescue effort from the tower. If I move forward in the statement to paragraph 30 and pick it up again from there, Mrs. Chewbacca continues, "Now I could see actual fire as I went along the walk towards the children. I could see flames shooting out of the cladding on the far side round from the left-hand side as I looked at the tower. The fire was on the left-hand right-hand side of the building as I was looking at it. From my daughter's Snapchat, I knew the fire had started on the other side, but had now spread right round the other side of the tower. I had never seen fire like it. The flames were mostly orange, but there was a lot of blue. It was high up on the ceiling, and it was like it was windy, although it wasn't. What I mean is the fire kept shooting out and coming back in. And again, if I now move forward to paragraph 37 in the statement and continue from there, there's a part of Mrs. Chewbacca's statement headed, how the fire spread. And the statement continues, when we returned from my mum's, there was a lot of grey smoke coming from the top of the building. One thing that stuck out to me were the blue lines of fire travelling diagonally across the building. I'm not sure which direction, up or down. I just remember they were diagonal lines. There were lots of blue lines of fire on the outside of the building. There was one flat in the middle of the building that was bright blue. I now know this is the west side of the tower. Someone mentioned it to me when we were outside Latimer Road Station. That's what drew my attention to it. They said, that's the gas. There were loads of people around us. It had become really busy in the area, even in the 5 minutes that we were gone. I thought, I need to get that picture in the PlayStation for my son. It seems so silly now. I didn't know if the police were up in Grenfell Walk or what the situation was there, but I wasn't really thinking straight. As I walked back towards Grenfell Walk, I was phoning people from the estate and telling them to get out of their flats. I remember I phoned my friend Farah, and from my phone records, I know this was at 2:20. I also called others around that time. The Muslim residents were already awake because it was Ramadan. Some looked out of their window and said they could see the fire from their flats. Grenfell Walk was just packed. Everyone was screaming hysterically. I left Hisham on the walk when I went up to the flat. I saw Elias was still on the walk. I saw that he was shouting at the tower. I told him to go to our mother's house where he would be safe, but he wouldn't. I left my husband and my brother together. I went to the flat and looked out at the tower from the landing. A lot of things were falling off the tower. Some looked like big pieces of ash. You could hear a metallic clang when some of the pieces hit the floor. Other pieces were floating down, but they were still on fire. The park was full of this debris from the tower. I went back into the flat and picked up the photograph, the bag containing our passports, my son's uniform, and his PlayStation. When I got outside, I saw my neighbour Margaret. I think she was in shock. I told her that she could come to my mum's house. She was with Elizabeth. I told her that she would be welcome too. I then saw a disabled lady trying to climb out of a window in Grenfell Tower that was level to Grenfell Walk. There is no door on this side of the flat, but the window is on what used to be a walkway between the walk and the tower. I could tell that she had a physical disability by the way she was holding herself. She was moving slowly and was supported by a man who I presumed was her partner. Between us was a big black gate that was stopping them from climbing onto the walk. The gate was over 7 feet high and it's always locked. This used to be an access point from the walk to the tower, but is now blocked off. I saw her partner going towards the gate. I realized that they were struggling and there was no one there to help them. The area was full, but no one was paying attention to them. I leaned over my balcony and saw my brother Elias. I pointed over and said, Elias, go and help them. I saw him go over and knew they were being assisted, so I went back to my flat. I now know this woman to be Leanne Jackson LeBlanc. I knew her from before the fire, from growing up in the area, but I didn't recognize her as the woman trying to get over the gate until I saw her at the hotel later and pieced it together. And that, Mr. Chairman, is all I propose to read from Mrs. Chewbacca's statement.
Well, thank you very much.
The next statement I would now like to put into the record is that of Hisham Chewbacca. And that's the reference for that is IWS 6038, please. If we could go, please, to page 15 of the statement. We see that it is signed with a statement of truth and dated the 6th of April 2018. As will be clear from Mr. Hisham Chewbacca, the husband of Hernn Chewbacca, whose statement I've just put into the record. He has provided the inquiry, as well as a statement, a number of exhibits which run from HC1 to HC15 and HC17 to HC29. And these are exhibited at IWS 36 and IWS 37. And then IWS 39 to 61, IWS 72 to 73, and IWS 79. A number of these, I should say, Mr. Chairman, were video exhibits which have been useful to our experts in undertaking their work. I don't propose to read from the statement, but I will say, draw attention to some parts of it now. It is a statement that is also of assistance. In particular, at paragraph 14 of the statement, Mr. Chewbacca describes how he called his friend Yusuf, who lived in the tower, to warn him of the fire and to tell him to get out. At paragraph 21, he describes how he assisted people as they came out of the tower. And at paragraph 22 explains that he and his wife Hernn then evacuated their children from their flat, taking them to a family member's home nearby. Mr. Chewbacca then returned to the tower and explains at paragraph 25 how, with his brother-in-law Elias, he assisted with the evacuation of Leanne Jackson LeBlanc, whose statement has previously been read into the record.
Yes, thank you.
And so I would just ask that Mr. Chewbacca's statement now be formally admitted into the record.
Yes, very well, thank you.
The next statement, if we could have on the screen, please, IWS 401030. Sorry, it's my fault. IWS 401030. And this is the statement of Elias Ati Karam. And it is, if we go to page 8 of the statement, we see that it is dated the 17th of August 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. The statement is accompanied by 4 exhibits, EA1 to EA4, the inquiry references for which are IWS 1028, IWS 1027, IWS 1026, and IWS 1029, respectively. As will be clear, Mr. Atikaram is the brother of Hernn Chewbacca, and in his statement he explains that he first became aware of the fire when his sister called and told him, and he then went to join her and her family at Grenfell Walk. And if I could just take you, Mr. Chairman, to paragraph 9 of the statement and read some parts of it.
Yes, thank you.
And this is when he has reached Grenfell Walk, and the statement continues. Hernn said, "Elias, there's a lady there, help her." She sounded urgent. The fire had grown more by this stage. This was before you get to the first floor boxing gym. I saw a black guy trying to get out from his flat. He was looking out of the window. I haven't seen him since. He was looking out at the smoke. There were railings there, across the ramp going to the bottom of the tower. They had blocked it off with big black barriers. I saw the guy with a baby. He came out of the window and walked along the narrow ledge. He was holding on to his child. Hisham came over. We helped her out of the window. I now know she's disabled. She didn't look well. She looked weak, as if she had no life in her. I had her on my shoulders. Her husband or boyfriend gave the child to Hisham, then came back to help. No one had come to help us. I don't know why the people said the fire brigade came quickly. I don't remember seeing them until much later on. Their flat was on the second floor. You have the creche on the first floor, then the boxing gym on the second floor, and then the flat started from the third floor. The fire wasn't far from them on the outside, but obviously we didn't know what was going on inside. We walked along the ledge. Hisham was holding my back, making sure I didn't fall. I was worried about the drop. Her husband or boyfriend was with us. I said to her, "Hold me here, I've got you, I've got you." I was just trying to reassure her and not let her know how bad the fire was. Some boys tried to get the lock of the gate open, but they couldn't. I could see people trying to get out of the floors higher up. If I thought about it, I would have hesitated. I was just full of adrenaline, so I just got on with it and did it. The woman and her husband or boyfriend were in a lot of shock. They were inside, so they couldn't see what was outside. She was just staring at the building. I was trying to talk to her, but she wasn't replying. A couple of minutes later, I saw the fire brigade running towards us. The fire brigade came to where the gate is, and they smashed the lock. No one had a key. From the bottom, they were trying to pull ladders up, so we helped them. Me, Hisham, Joseph, my friend Mo. There was a lot of us trying to help. It was awkward to bring the ladders up. They were pushing from below, and we were pulling. There were a lot of people trying to help. It was a bit chaotic just because there was a lot of people. I think they put the ladder up against the wall. It's a bit of a blur, but I think 2 young guys came out on the ladder. Hernn was calling me non-stop. A lot of things were dropping from the building, big silver pieces. I saw a black guy tying up quilts. He was a bald guy. I've seen him on the news quite a bit. He was in the hotel with me afterwards. He threw the quilts out of the window. They were long. I found out afterwards he was on the 14th or 15th floor. I don't know how many quilts he had, but they reached a long way down. He had his daughter tied up to him on his back with a sheet, the way my nan used to do it, the way they do in Africa. She was a little girl about 2 or 3 years old. He started trying to climb down. Everyone was screaming, "No, don't." I think that's the first point when I thought, this is getting out of hand now. It's gone to the next level. We didn't know what was going on inside, so we all had to judge how serious it was by the time we could see on the outside, but was by what we could see on the outside. To see someone trying to climb out with sheets made me realize how bad it had got. Later, when I was standing by the station, I remember seeing a black guy come out in his boxers. I think it was him. And that's all I propose to read from that statement.
Right. Thank you.
The next statement is at IWS 401032, please. And if we could, this is the statement of Yusra Chewbacca, who's the oldest child of Hernn and Hisham Chewbacca. And
yes.
If we go, please, to page 11. We see that the statement is dated the 16th of August 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. It is accompanied by 5 exhibits, which I would ask to also be admitted into the record. They are reference YCO 1 to YCO 5, with inquiry references of IWS 1019 to 1023. I won't read from the statement, but just to give it some context, in the statement, Yusra describes at paragraph 7 that she was best friends with Nur Huda el-Wahhabi, who sadly passed away in the fire.
Yes.
Yusra was outside with her father when they became aware of the fire, and in her statement she describes the attempts that her mother made to warn neighbours and residents of the tower of the fire.
Yes,
and with that context, I just ask that that statement be admitted into the record, please.
Yes, very well.
The next statement is also a statement that I want to admit into the record. It's that of Aziza Boudjafcha, IWS 6015, please. If we go to the last page of the statement, page 11, it is dated the 4th of April 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. There is one exhibit, which is Exhibit AB2, and the inquiry reference for that, for it to go into the record, is IWS 401068. Again, to give some context, in June 2013, Mrs. Boudjafcha moved with her children into the flat on Grenfell Walk, which had been her parents' home and where she herself had grown up. As she explains in her statement, she knew the El-Wahhabi family, who, as you've heard, Mr. Chairman, lived in flat 182 in the tower, and she knew them well. In the statement, she explains that she first became aware of the fire in Grenfell sometime after midnight, after being woken up by two of her children who'd noticed it. I would mention in particular paragraph 29 of the statement, where Mrs. Budafcha gives a description of seeing the tower on fire. She also describes, at paragraph 39, the family being told by the police to evacuate their home on that night.
Yes.
And again, I'd ask for that statement to be admitted into the record.
Yes,
now.
of course. Thank you.
The next statement that we turn to is that of Zora Al-Assad at IWS 50110, please. Again, if there are no exhibits accompanying that statement, but if we go to page 8, please, of the statement, we see that it has a statement of truth and is dated the 16th of May 2018. Mrs. Al-Assad explains in her statement that she and her family had lived in Grenfell Walk since 1976. Again, I would draw particular attention to paragraphs 19 to 21 and 25 to 31 of the statement, where Mrs. Al-Assad sets out how her family members and neighbours made her aware of the fire and told her to evacuate her home, and then what she could see of what was happening at Grenfell Tower in the early hours of the 14th of June 2017. And with that summary, may I ask that that statement is admitted into the record?
Yes, thank you.
Could I now have on the screen, please, IWS 401158. This is the statement of Ahmed Al-Assad. If we go to the last page of the statement, please, page 8. We see that it is dated the 25th of October 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. There are no exhibits accompanying the statement. Again, I would ask that it just be admitted into the record. I don't propose to read particularly from it, but I will give some context. And it is this. Ahmed Al-Assad is Zora Al-Assad's son.
Yes.
And he had lived at the family home in Grenfell Walk since he was born. I want to note in particular that at paragraphs 30 to 31 of his statement, he describes how after he and his family had evacuated from their home, he telephoned his friend Sam Daniels to tell him to get out of the tower. The final statement from Grenfell Walk residents that needs to be put into the record today is at IWS 6090. And this is the statement of Daniel Udi. There are no exhibits accompanying the statement, but if we go to page 5 of the statement, please, we see that it is dated the 9th of May 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. Again, to put the statement into context, Mr. Udi in the statement explains that he'd lived on Grenfell Walk for 23 years at the time of the fire. Again, I draw particular attention to paragraphs 11 to 16 and 18 to 19 of Mr. Udi's statement, where he explains that he was woken by someone in uniform knocking at his door, telling him to get out. And he then goes on to describe what he saw of the fire burning as he left, including cladding exploding and a recollection of a pungent chemical smell. And so with that context, I'd ask that Mr. Udi's statement be formally admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I now turn to the statements that we've received from residents of Hurstway Walk, please?
Yes.
The inquiry has received 22 statements from residents of Hurstway Walk, 4 of which we have already on earlier occasions put into the record. And what I'm going to deal with today is the remaining 18 statements. Again, in doing so, in some instances I may read extracts from the statements, but in others I will just give the context and then ask for it to be admitted into the record.
Yes, all right, thank you.
The first statement that we turn to is at IWS 50773. And that should be the statement of Virginia Sang. If we go, please, to page 9 of the statement. We see that it is dated the 27th of June 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. There are no exhibits to accompanying the statement to be put into the record. Ms. Sang explains in her statement she'd lived on Hurstway Walk for 40 years, and at the time of the fire she was living there alone. She'd been out that evening to the leisure centre with friends, returning home about 9 p.m. And if I could pick it up and read from some parts of the statement, in particular, if I take you, Mr. Chairman, to page 4 and paragraph 21. The statement continues at paragraph 21. I went home and changed into my night clothes. I wake up for work at 6:30 a.m. and so I went to bed. I was woken up to my phone ringing at 12:40 a.m. It was my neighbour saying there was a fire at Grenfell Tower. I heard loads of commotion outside my flat, but I didn't really pay any attention to it at the time. I got out of bed and I turned the TV on and watched the news. It was Sky News, and I saw the fire in its earlier small stage. But by the time I came outside, it had spread. My neighbour called me on my phone and she told me to get out of the flat. So I put on my dressing gown. I turned around to pick up my phone and cigarettes and I left. I know now that the estate had been evacuated except the 500 numbers. My daughter phoned me and said to get out. I didn't feel I was particularly in danger, but I didn't know what was going to happen, so thought it best to get out. I came outside of the building at the front and onto Bramley Road, and then I walked to Station Walk to walk to the tower, because a lot of people seemed to be outside and I wanted to see what was happening. There were many residents standing around watching the fire. Many were screaming, trying to get people to help, and a lot of us were in shock, like I was. At first, when I got outside, there were no police officers, and there was no one there to tell us what to do. People were just standing outside watching. I then saw police officers, and they realised there were two ways to get to Grenfell Tower. Some police officers did come up to us residents, and they tried to stop us from going down where the tower was. There were about 4 police officers in total around the area we were at. If I continue then to pick it up again at paragraph 32 on page 6. The statement there continues, we were all still trying to get forward to help people running who were running out. These were the residents who were from the lower floors of the tower who'd managed to get outside. The police, however, were telling us to stay back away from the tower. We helped some residents who made it alive from the tower and took them aside to a tree and threw water on them because their clothes were smoking. One of the men was asking for us to throw water over him. I could see all the smoke coming from them. They were having difficulty breathing. One man was Somalian or Ethiopian, and there was a young girl. I'm not sure of her description. I saw a man and a child who was at age 7 or 8 years old, and they were sitting by the tree. The man was having difficulty breathing, so we put him down on the ground to help him. But the police came and they put a blue canvas around him. He was in his early to mid-30s. I knew that wasn't good, and I think he died. Mr. Chairman, that's all I propose to read from Ms. Sang's statement.
Yes, thank you.
But if I turn now to another statement from a Hurstway Walk resident, and that is at IWS 50432. And this is the statement of Effie Sturge. If we go to the last page, page 6, please. We see that it's dated the 22nd of May 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. There are no exhibits accompanying the statement. Whilst I don't propose to read from the statement, I do want to give it some context. And in the statement, Ms. Sturge explains that she moved into her flat on Hurstway Walk in early 2008. She had shared ownership over the property with the Notting Hill Housing. in the statement, she describes how that she first woke up at about 5 a.m., and that was by noise outside, but then only became aware of the fire following a call from her mother. And she then joined others outside before deciding that she would leave the area in order to get to work that day.
Yes.
With that, I'd ask that the statement is admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
If I could now have, please, IWS 50492, please. This is the witness statement of Helen Hartley. If we go, please, to page 10. We see there it's signed and dated the 30th of May 2018 and carries a statement of truth. There are no exhibits accompanying that statement, but Ms. Hartley has also made a statement, a supplementary statement, which is the reference for which is at IWS 401054.
Yes.
And if we go to page 2 of that statement, we see there's the signature and the date, the 5th of September 2018, and the statement carries a statement of truth. The purpose of that statement was to produce 2 exhibits, yes, which is to which in the statement Ms. Hartley refers. The inquiry references for those are the internal references are HH1 and HH2. The inquiry references are IWS 1055 and IWS 1053. Again, I don't propose to read from Ms. Hartley's witness statement, but I do want to give it the context, and it is this. She had lives on Hurstway Walk with her son. Like Miss Sturge Opelu, she part-owns her property with Notting Hill Housing, and she had lived at that property since 2000. I would note in particular paragraphs 8 to 19 of the first statement, Ms. Hartley describes waking up in the early hours of the 14th of June, realising there was a fire, and then leaving her home with her son to go to Grenfell Walk. In the statement, she describes the nature of the flames she saw at the tower and the speed at which the fire spread through the tower. She continues by explaining that she returned to her flat and then describes at paragraphs 33 to 36 how she and her son were evacuated by the police shortly after 2:40 a.m. And as I've explained, the purpose of the supplementary statement was to produce 2 exhibits, a photograph and a video.
Yes.
Yes. And again, if I ask that that statement be formally admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you very much.
Could I now have, please, IWS 50554? This is the statement of Maria Gill. If we go to page 8 of the statement, please. We see that it is dated the 2nd of June 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. The statement, and Ms. Gill has provided the inquiry with a number of exhibits, which are video exhibits. They are referenced in terms of MG1 to MG10, each with their own inquiry reference number, which if I just put those in order into the record are IWS 565, IWS 556, IWS 566, IWS 557, IWS 558, IWS 559, IWS 555, IWS 562, IWS 563, and IWS 560. Again, just to give a short summary of the statement. In the statement, Ms. Gill explains that she'd lived on the Lancaster West Estate in the area around Grenfell Tower since the late 1970s. And in fact, she and her family were one of the first to move onto Hurstway Walk. She moved to the present property on Hurstway Walk in 1998. At the time of the fire, she was living there with her daughter and grandson. Perhaps what is worth in particular drawing attention to in this statement is paragraph 7 to 12, where Miss Gill describes becoming aware of the fire and leaving her flat.
Yes.
And then paragraphs 25 to 27, she describes the evacuation of the walkways. And as I've said, she has also provided the inquiry with a number of useful videos, and what is particularly helpful is that in the statement, Miss Gill has been able to give the time at which she made these recordings.
Yes, thank you.
And with that, I ask that that statement be admitted into the record.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Could I now please have IWS 50602, please? This is the statement of Dougal Steward. And if we go to page 10 of the statement, we see that it is dated the 4th of June 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. There are no exhibits accompanying this statement. And just, I would like to read out parts of it, please.
Yes.
But to give it an introduction, Mr. Stewart in his statement explains that he'd lived on Hurstway Walk since 1994, and at the time of the fire was living in the property with his wife, Angel Damaso Stewart. And if I then pick it up at paragraph 11 on page 3 of the statement, just below the heading 14th of June. On the evening of the fire, Angel and I ate our evening meal as usual, relaxed and watched TV. We enjoyed the summer evening before we went to bed. I think we probably went to bed about midnight, maybe a little bit later. I wasn't woken by the fire. It must have been about 2 a.m. when my wife Angel heard knocking at the door. We heard 1 or 2 knocks, which we ignored, but then when we heard knocking for the third time, I came out of my pajamas and answered the door. It was the fire brigade. They said there was a fire in the tower and that we needed to evacuate the walkway. I grabbed my wallet and keys, and Angel grabbed her phone and our passports, and that was about it. We got out straight away pretty much. It was within 5 minutes of answering the door to the fire brigade. When somebody in a uniform comes round and tells you need to leave because it isn't safe, you don't hang around. A couple of people on the walkway stayed that night, but I figure you can always replace stuff. You can't replace people. Before I left, though, I went to the window in our living room and looked at the tower, as you can see it pretty clearly from there. I could see that the fire had already spread to a couple of floors. The whole thing hadn't gone up by that point, though. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was surreal, like an out-of-body experience. The smoke was black and the flames were so red. My thoughts went to the tenants of the tower, and I hoped that they had managed to leave their apartments. In paragraph 16, Mr. Stewart continues, the firefighters who asked us to leave didn't sound panicked, but there was definitely a sense of urgency in their voices. Retrospectively, I think that evacuating the walkway was a very real precaution in case the fire spread. We left the flat and somebody told us, I can't remember who, to go round to Clarendon Walk where somebody would take our name and flat number. When we got there, though, there was nobody there. I couldn't believe that there wasn't a central point in the checklist to work out who was accounted and unaccounted for. Angel and I were just wandering around by ourselves. From Clarendon Walk, we walked to Safe Stores and back again. There's an alleyway there. We must have stopped and waited around 100 metres from Safe Stores. We waited, sat on a wall for about an hour. You could partly see the tower from Clarendon Walk, but not very much of it. You could see properly the tower from Safe Store. I can't even describe it. It wasn't just a quick fire. It was a fire that just went on and on and on. I'm not sure when it spread out, but it was immense. It was like a Roman candle. I have never seen anything like it before. It was shocking. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt numb. The smoke was billowing everywhere. It wasn't enough to make you cough and splutter, but it was enough to tickle your throat and you could taste the smoke in the air. The air was thick with the smoke. There were lots of police around, and from safe store we could see the ambulances toing and froing. The volume of the ambulances showed us how many people had been hurt. You could see the fire services and police rushing around doing their jobs. It was like organised chaos. We didn't know what was going on. Even the police didn't look like they knew what was going on. I didn't know what to feel about anything. I was pleased to see that there were so many service professionals doing their jobs. There was nothing that I could have done to help, so it was good to see that there were people there helping. There were lots of people milling around. We saw a few casualties and relatives of people stuck in the tower. It's a close-knit community, and I recognise some of the people. They must have come down as soon as they knew what was happening. The police didn't seem particularly concerned by the bystanders. I don't think they really knew what to do with them. I can remember all those people now, the relatives of people trapped in the tower crying. I felt numb. Angel and I waited by ourselves for about an hour in our pyjamas before somebody walked past and told us to come with them. I can't remember who this person was. They could have been a uniform or a volunteer. They took us the back way to the Portobello Rugby Club on Walmer Road. We were there in 5 minutes or so. I don't know what I was really thinking at the time. I think that I was mostly concerned about getting out of the cold and having somewhere to rest. By the time we got to the club, I think that it was about 4 a.m. There were lots of other people in the club. Some of them were relatives of the victims and people who'd escaped from the tower. People were telephoning their relatives and things and trying to work out where people were and whether they were safe. I felt overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation. It was only beginning to sink in what had actually happened. I felt overtired, numb, and very concerned about my community. If I move on to paragraph 26, it continues. We stayed in the rugby club for the whole day, pretty much. We watched the TV a bit. I think that it was showing the news and the fire in the tower. I can't really remember. I felt overwhelmed by the whole thing and couldn't really engage with it. We were under the impression that we weren't allowed back into our flat. We weren't told this specifically, but the general chat in the rugby club was that the estate had been sealed off by the police. We accepted that this was the situation and stayed put. We didn't have anywhere else to go. As the day passed, Angel and I occasionally left the rugby club to see what was going on. I remember thinking that there was nothing much we could do. There were lots of volunteers around, but everything was so chaotic. There was no plan in place. Even the air smelt of chaos. We weren't provided with any updates in the rugby club. People didn't know what was going on. The smoke was prevailing. I remember that at about 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., the relatives of the victims started to get angry. I've no idea what was happening, really. We didn't stay much longer than that. Angel made some phone calls, and we ended up going to stay with Amy, one of Angel's friends. We didn't have any clothes or anything. They wouldn't let us back into the flat, and we had left in such a rush that we hadn't grabbed anything. We stayed with Amy for a couple of days before we returned home. It was only whilst I was recovering at Amy's that I realised the scale of the disaster. And that's all I propose to read from that statement.
Yes, very well, thank you.
If I could now turn, please, to statements of Philip King. And the first of these is at IWS 50592. This is Mr. King's first statement, and if we go to page 7 of the statement, we see that it is dated the 4th of June 2018 and signed with a statement of truth. There is one exhibit accompanying that first statement, which is a video recording, and the inquiry is identified within the statement as PK1, and the inquiry reference for that is IWS 1061. Mr. King has also made a supplementary witness statement. If I could have that up on the screen, please. IWS 401057. And if go to the second page of that, we see that it is signed with a statement of truth and dated the 5th of September 2018. The purpose of that supplementary statement was for Mr. King to produce a number of additional video recordings, and there are 9 further video recordings, which are internally referenced as PK2 to PK10, and to give their inquiry statement references for the record. They are IWS 1067, IWS 1065, IWS 1056, IWS 1059, IWS 1058, IWS 1064, IWS 1066, IWS 1063, and IWS 1062. I will not read from Mr. King's statement, but I do want to give a brief summary of it.
Yes.
In his written evidence to the inquiry, Mr. King explained that he'd lived in Hurstway Walk for 15 years and at the time of the fire was living alone. It's useful to highlight paragraphs 8 to 13 of the first statement, because there Mr. King describes waking up in the early hours of the 14th of June and going outside to see what was happening. He states at paragraph 19 that police officers told people to go back to their home, and then goes on to explain that he returned to his home where he says, and this is at paragraph 25, that he felt safe, and he remained there until the following afternoon. And with that summary, may I ask that the statements are formally admitted into the record?
Yes, thank you.
Could I now have, please, up on the screen, IWS 50645. And if we go to page 9, this is the statement of Ahmad Al-Saadi. The statement is dated 2nd of June 2018, and it's signed with a statement of truth. There are 2 exhibits accompanying it, which are 2 video exhibits, internal references AA1 and AA2. And for the record, the inquiry references for those 2 videos are IWS 644 and IWS 647. Again, whilst not reading from the statement, I do want to give a brief outline of its contents. Mr. Al-Saadi explains that he moved into Hurstway Walk with his wife and their 4 children in August 2016. And as to the events of the night, in the statement he describes being first alerted to a fire at the tower following a call from a neighbour, which he times as between 12:30 and 1 a.m. He and his wife then took turns to go outside of the flat to observe events. But it's at paragraphs 13 to 15 where Mr. Al-Saadi discusses the point where the family decided themselves to evacuate their home. And this was at about 2 a.m. He and his wife then took their children to a neighbour's home. Mr. Al-Saadi comments that he then just was awake throughout the night watching developments. At paragraphs 19 to 23, he describes returning to his home in Hurstway Walk at around 6 a.m. and how his wife and children then also returned at about 7 to 7:30 a.m. They were not evacuated from their property. When they returned, they found the building empty, but they were reassured by a police officer later in the day on the 14th of June that the tower was not going to collapse and that they were safe to remain in their home. And again, with that summary, may I ask that Mr. Al-Saadi's statement is formally admitted into the record?
Yes, of course, thank you.
Could I now have, please, IWS 50966. This is a statement of Mariama El-Hassani, who's also a resident of Hurstway Walk. There are no exhibits accompanying the statement, but if we go to page 5, please. You see the statement of truth is on the preceding page, but we see that on page 5 there is the signature of Ms. El-Hassani, and
yes.
It's dated the 26th of June 2018. She explains in her statement that she lived on Hurstway Walk with her 3 children, and at paragraph 6 to 14 of the statement gives the detail of how she first became aware of the fire and how she then evacuated herself and her children from their home on that night. And with that short outline, may I ask that that statement is also admitted into the record?
Yes, thank you.
Can I now turn, please, to IWS 50284 and the statement of Joanne Minton. If we go, please, to page 6 of the statement, we see there that it carries a statement of truth, is signed and dated the 21st of May 2018. Mm-hmm. There are 2 exhibits produced by Ms. Minton, and they are both plans of the area. The internal references are JM1 and JM2, but for the record, the inquiry references are IWS 466 and IWS 281. Again, whilst I don't propose to read from the statement, Mr. Chairman, I will give a short outline. In the statement, Ms. Minton explains that she lived in her property on Hurstway Walk and had lived there since 1984. She co-owned it, and at the time of the fire was living there with a joint leaseholder. Particularly useful to draw attention to Ms. Minton's description of the evacuation of Hurstway Walk, which we find at paragraphs 17 to 20 of the statement, and that evacuation was prompted by police officers banging on the front door of the flat. And with that outline, may I ask that that statement is admitted into the record?
Yes, thank you.
Can I turn now to the statement of Rania Eldery, which is at IWS 50915. There are no exhibits accompanying this statement, but if we go to page 18, please, we see that it carries a statement of truth, is signed and dated the 23rd of May 2018. To give an outline of the statement, at the time of the fire, as she explains, Miss Eldery was living in Hurstway Walk with her mother, Bunia Ismail. In her statement, Miss Eldery describes how a neighbour first alerted her to the fire at about 1:15 a.m. and she then took her dog and went to Latimer Road Station. Whilst outside, like so many in the community, Miss Eldery was able to see the progress of the fire, and she has set out her recollection of what she saw in her witness statement. She describes returning to her flat an hour or so later, and then at paragraphs 31 to 34 explains how, at around 3 a.m., police officers told her and her mother to leave their home, and that is what then followed.
Yes.
And with that outline, may I ask that that statement is admitted into the record?
Yes, thank you.
Could I now have, please, IWS 50745? This is a statement of Salma Ismail. There are no exhibits accompanying the statement, but if we go to page 5,
yes, thank you.
You see that it carries a statement of truth, is signed and dated the 22nd of June 2018. Again, just to give a short outline of this statement, Mrs. Ismail explained that she'd lived on Hurstway Walk with her husband for about 18 years. And at paragraphs 4 to 7 of the statement, she describes how she first became aware of the fire and how she then went outside to investigate what was going on, leaving her husband in the flat. She describes, at paragraphs 10 to 12, seeing how the fire spread and recollects pieces of plastic and aluminium falling from it. At paragraphs 14 to 15, Mrs. Ismail explains that she found her husband outside when she was trying to return to her own home. He explained to her that while she had been out, the police had evacuated him from the flat. And she therefore then called a friend, Amina Yabayjada, who also lives on Hurstway Walk, to tell her that she had to evacuate. And I ask that that statement be admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you very much.
The next statement we turn to is at IWS 50785. And this is the statement of Amina Yabajada. There are no exhibits accompanying it, but if we turn to page 13, please. We see that it carries a statement of truth, is signed and dated the 28th of June 2018. Again, before I ask that it be formally admitted into the record, I'd like just to give a short outline of the contents of the statement,
yes,
particularly those relevant, as we have been doing to phase one. Mrs. Yabajada explains that she'd lived on Hurstway Walk since 2000, and at the time of the fire, she was living there with her adult son, Omar. In the statement, and this is at paragraph 5, she states that Fawzia El-Wahabi, Elsa El-Gawari, and Khadija Kaloufi were my best friends. The statement continues with a description of Mrs. Yabajada being warned of the fire by her neighbours, Nadia El-Bouti and Selma Ismail. And when she saw the fire, she and her son left their home immediately, and in doing so came into contact with police officers who were beginning to evacuate the walkway. Mm-hmm. And that's all I propose to say about that statement.
Yes, thank you. That will be admitted as well.
Thank you. Could I now please have on the screen IWS 50699? We have the statement of Christine Bonnet. If I could please turn to page 9. So it carries a statement of truth, is signed and dated the 2nd of June 2018. There are 3 exhibits accompanying the statement, internally referenced to CB1 to CB3, but the inquiry references are at IWS 696, pages 1 to 6. Again, just to give a short summary of the statement, Ms. Bonnet in her statement explains that she'd lived at the same property in Hurstway since 1979, having first moved there as a child with her parents, and she was still living there with her elderly mother at the time. She had previously, before the fire, lived in the tower itself. On the night of the fire, Ms. Bonnet was woken just after 2 a.m. by a call from a friend who thought that there was a fire in Grenfell Tower and asked Ms. Bonnet if she could take a look. And at paragraphs 12 to 17 of the statement, Ms. Bonnet goes on to describe how, having then been advised by her friend to leave, and from what she could see of the tower herself, she decided to get her mother ready to leave. They had not yet left their flat before police officers arrived at their door, and they were evacuated at the instigation of the police. But that was so rapid that they didn't have time to do anything except to put a coat over their night clothes before leaving their home. And so I'd ask that that statement be formally admitted into the record.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Could we now please have IWS 50897, please? This is the statement of Shukri Ali. It is not accompanied by any exhibits, but if we go to page 10 of the statement, please. We see that it has a statement of truth, is signed and is dated the 14th of May 2018. Again, I don't propose to read from the statement, but I will give a short outline of its contents. Miss Ali moved to Hurstway Walk in October 2012, and at the time of the fire, she was living there with her 3 children. On the night itself, her sister, Fatima, was staying with her. And Miss Ali's family were not evacuated from their home by the emergency services. She describes at paragraph 20 of her statement how her sister stayed at the property with 2 of her children whilst Miss Ali went outside with her daughter. And she describes at paragraph 25 that the residents of Testerton Walk appeared to start evacuating around 4 a.m. And that residents were concerned that the gas supply in the tower and then the walkways might explode. And it was that concern that led Miss Ali to self-evacuate her sister and her children later that morning. And if I could ask for that statement to be put into the record, please.
Yes, thank you very much.
The next statement I'd like to turn to is the statement of Tagwa Mutwali, which is at IWS 50942. There are no exhibits accompanying that statement, but if we turn to page 7, please.
Yes.
We see that it has a statement of truth, is signed and is dated the 10th of July 2018. In the statement, Mrs. Mutwali explains that she'd lived on Hurstway Walk with her husband and her children since September 2008. At paragraphs 5 to 9 of the statement, she describes how she became aware of the fire and then goes on to explain how at around 3 a.m. the police evacuated the family from their flat. She also describes how she, family members and friends attempted to make contact with people they knew in the tower. And that's all I will say about that statement, but I ask that it be admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
Could I now turn, please, to IWS 6026, please? This is the statement of Ibtisam Al-Fawaz. And if we go, please, to page 11 of the statement.
Yes.
We see that it carries a statement of truth, is signed and is dated the 20th of April 2018. In the statement, Ms. Al-Fawaz produces 9 video exhibits, which are internally referenced IA01 to IA09, and to, for the record, give the inquiry references for those exhibits. They are as follows. For IA01, it is IWS 031. For IA02, it is IWS 029. For IA03, it is IWS 027. For IA04, it is IWS 024. For IA06, it is IWS 022. For IA07, it is IWS 030. For IA08, it is IWS 028. For IA09, it is IWS 025. The last video to reference is IA05, the inquiry reference for which is IWS 1174. Again, to give the context, Mrs. Al-Fawaz moved to Hurstway Walk in 2010, and at the time of the fire, she was living there with her 5 children. On the night of 13th of June 2017, she was at home with her children and also with a friend and that friend's daughter. They became aware of the fire at around 12:45 a.m. At paragraphs 29 to 34, Mrs. Al-Fawaz describes how shortly after 2 a.m., she realized that the fire was not only going to continue to spread and could not be contained. And she describes how she then evacuated her family from their flat. And it was just as she was doing so that a policeman came down the walkway seeking to evacuate residents.
Yes.
And again, I ask that that statement be placed into the record, please.
Yes, thank you.
Could I now have IWS 50784 on the screen, please? This is the statement of Farah Saruk. If I could go to page 4 of the statement. We see that it carries a statement of truth, is signed and dated the 28th of June 2018. There are no exhibits to accompany this statement, but in it, and again to give an outline, Mrs. Saruk explains that she'd lived on Hurstway Walk with her husband and children since 2007. And at paragraphs 8 to 12 of her witness statement, she explains how a neighbour alerted her to the fire and told her to get out. She became aware of the fire, and then she goes on to explain how she and her family evacuated very quickly afterwards. It is also worthwhile to note that at paragraph 12 of the statement, Mrs. Saruk explains that she attempted to contact Nur Huda al-Wahhabi during the early hours of the 14th of June, but was unable to get through on the telephone.
And you'd like that admitted into the record?
I would, yes, please.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. And now I think it's the last statement from resident of First Way Walk which we need to admit into the record today.
Yes.
And that is the statement of Samira Hamid, which is at IWS 50311, please. There are no exhibits accompanying the statement, but could we have, please, page 4 of the statement? We see that it is dated the 21st of May 2018. It is signed and it carries a statement of truth. And if I could turn back to the first page of the statement, and I would propose to read briefly from this statement. And this is a statement of that part of it that deals with the events of 13th and 14th of June, which begins at paragraph 6. On the 9th and 13th June 2017, I was preparing food at about midnight. It was Ramadan, and so we had been fasting, but we would eat before sunrise. My kitchen had a balcony, and the balcony doors were open. I could hear someone screaming. I was not concerned by this because there was often a lot of noise in the neighbourhood. I went out onto the balcony. I could see smoke coming from the tower. There was smoke outside the balcony. My upstairs neighbour shouted to me that the tower was on fire. I got dressed and went out to have a look. I could see a big fire from the tower. I could see all of my neighbours from our block, and the 2 nearby blocks were going outside and standing outside our block, where they had a good view of the tower and the fire. People told me that we should also leave our flat and I should take my children outside. Names redacted is the name of one of Mrs. Ahmed's children. And it continues, it's my daughter's friends came out and told her that we should leave our flat. I went back to the flat to get my children. They didn't get dressed, they just came in their pyjamas. We were being told to hurry and just come out of our home. We all went outside. This was at about 12:30. We did not know where to go or what to do. We have a lot of friends who lived in the tower. I was trying to call them on my mobile. I tried to call my friend Fawzia Wahabi. I was worried about her. My daughter was trying to call Nur Huda, who she was friends with, but Nur Huda was not answering her phone. My daughter's friends were also trying to call other friends in the tower. My daughter and her friends were crying as they spoke with one girl who was telling them that the fire was catching up with her. They remained on the phone with this girl until her phone went dead. My daughter was very upset. The fire was getting worse. We could see and hear people screaming from the windows and waving their hands and the lights on their phones. We could see a woman holding her baby and saying, "Please save my baby." She threw her baby and someone caught it. We could see people trying to jump and obviously wanting to escape from the building. We could see people tying bed sheets together and lowering them from the windows. We were shouting at people not to do this because the sheets they made were not long enough to allow them to reach the ground. We could hear people shouting, "Please help us." We wanted to help people, but there's nothing we could do. There were police officers controlling the crowds and stopping people who wanted to get through to help people in the tower. At around 1 a.m, I remember seeing a group of Moroccan men who'd come out of the mosque, pushing past the police to try and save people. And that's all I propose to read from that statement.
Right, thank you.
But again, I ask that be admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I now hand over to Ms. Siva Kumaran, who will deal with... Yes, actually, and before I do, could I perhaps just ask if we could just have a short break? Because I've noticed I've been reading for just over an hour.
Well, I'm not surprised if you feel the need for a break. Perhaps we might all have a short break at this stage. So, should we say 25 past 11?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, thank you very much. 25 past 11, please. Yes, now, Ms. Sivakumaran, you're going to deal with the next statement or two, are you?
That's correct. So I'm going to continue now with the statements that have been provided from residents of Barrington Walk.
Yes, thank you.
The inquiry's received 13 statements in total from residents of Barrington Walk. 5 have already been read into the record, and I wish to read the remaining 8 statements today.
Yes, thank you.
The first statement that I propose to put into the record is that of Thomas Joe Delaney,
Yes.
and the reference is IWS 265.
Thank you.
No, that statement is signed, if we can turn to the last page, page 8, on the 21st of May 2018. And the statement of truth is on the preceding page, I apologise, it's signed on the 20... sorry, it's on the same date, it's just above the signature. There's a statement of truth. I propose to also read from this statement, but before I do so, I would just mention that Mr. Delaney had moved into Barrington Walk in 2010, and at the time of the fire, he lived there with his 2 dogs. As well as this statement, Mr. Delaney has provided the inquiry with a number of very helpful photos and videos from the nights of the fire. They exhibited it as TJD 1 to 46.
Yes, thank you.
And the references for those exhibits are IWS 252 to IWS 264. The references continue IWS 266 to IWS 271, IWS 396 to IWS 416, IWS 418 to IWS 422, and IWS 722 and IWS 1137. So those are the exhibits of Mr. Delaney, and I'd ask they're put into the record.
Yes, thank you.
I would then refer you to the content of his statement, starting at paragraph 4 of his statement on page 1. And I propose to take up his statement from there, where he says, "On the evening of the fire, I was aware something was wrong at around just before 1 a.m. when I saw blue lights on Grenfell Road. I didn't check what was happening. I would often see ambulances or fire engines out there attending to issues in the tower, and it wasn't bothering me. At around 1:05 a.m. or 1:10 a.m., a neighbour, Lucas, knocked at my door and said, 'Grenfell Tower was on fire.' I put on a tracksuit and walked from my block out into Grenfell Walk, where I saw the fire around the 4th floor on the east side of the property, or what I now know to be flat 16. It had started on one side of the tower in one area, but while I was out there, I saw it spreading towards the centre of the building at the same level." I then propose to pick up again from paragraph 25, where he describes the evacuation of residents from Barrington Walk. 23. Yes. And this is page 5 of his statement.
Thank you.
At paragraph 23, he continues, "I returned to my flat at 2 a.m., where I also video recorded and photographed the fire engines I could see on Grenfell Road from my balcony. It was utter chaos downstairs. Grenfell Road was too narrow to allow the fire engines access, and residents were forced to go down there to move their parked cars, doing 3-point turns. There was a chain of fire engines all backed up on Grenfell Road, and people were forced to drive their cars onto the paved areas to get them out of the way of the fire engines. I went back to Grenfell Walk and took photos TJD 16, and he gives the specific reference, TJD 17 and TJD 18, which show the scene on Grenfell Road as seen from Grenfell Walk. Photos TJD 19, TJD 20, TJD 21 and 22, as well as video TJD 23, show the scene on Grenfell Road as seen from the balcony of my flat on Barrington Walk. I could see downstairs beneath me whilst on Grenfell Walk, and from my balcony, the fire engines were not as close as I thought they should be, and neither were the firemen. Fire debris continued to prevent the firefighters getting closer, and the lack of access points prevented the fire engines from getting any closer. A policeman entered Barrington Walk from the Grenfell Tower end at roughly 2:30 a.m. He came running in. I can't remember his exact ethnicity, but I do recall that he was not Caucasian. He had a high visibility jacket on, but not a constable's helmet, maybe a flat cap or no hat. He was saying everyone should get out. Barrington Walk has 3 levels internally. I was just outside my front door, and he was on the ground floor, which is the level the Grenfell Walk entrance is on. He was about to come up the stairs to my level of the block, presumably to alert other flats, but I felt it was more important that he let another block know. So I said, "Don't worry, mate, you go through and tell them in that section. I'll do these flats." I banged on the doors on my level and the level above to alert them to get out. I think I banged on, and he names 2 specific flats, to all of the following flats. Basically everyone on the top floor. Those flats, and I got responses from most. I kicked on their doors as loudly as I could. Most answered the door quickly. I was concerned about one of the flats near Tomasina's. The occupant is a nurse with a teenager and young kids, so I was particularly concerned for them. We were heading to the rear end of Barrington Walk, as this was the way we were instructed to evacuate by the policeman I had seen earlier. Barrington Walk is divided into 3 sections. Flats 301 to 339 are in the section closest to Grenfell Walk. The next section has flats 401 to 439, and the final section is flats 501 to 522. Although they are all joined, the 500 section could not be accessed from the rest of the block internally, but there was an internal connection between the 300s part and the 400s part. However, the 300 and 400 parts are separated internally by doors that can only be opened with an entry fob. As a general rule, the fobs of residents of one part cannot open the door to the other part, so residents from the 300s cannot access the 400 section and vice versa. There are rubbish chutes in the middle and the staircase that leads out to the grassed area at the rear between Barrington Walk and Testerton Walk, and he's marked this green X on a map that's exhibited to a statement. But we were all told to evacuate via the main entrance exit point for the 400 section of the block, which is marked with a blue X on the map. However, residents from the 300s cannot open the internal door leading to the 400 block as their fobs don't work on the door, as it was still locked. Despite the emergency situation, it was therefore fortunate that my key fobs did operate the internal doors. They had been reprogrammed when I suffered a broken leg shortly after I moved into the estate, as I found it easier to use the door at that end of the block whilst on crutches, and the access rights had never been revoked. In case it is relevant, when my key fobs needed to be authorised to open the doors in 400 section of Barrington Walk, I didn't need to take them to any office. I was simply contacted when the process had been completed at their end. I was therefore able to open the door on the ground floor to let residents through, and wedge the door open with welcome mats I took from the flats nearby, whilst I gave Thomasina Hessel my fob, and she went upstairs to do the same thing to the other doors on the first floor. I left the block with my 2 dogs, accompanied by various residents, and that's where I propose to stop with that statement. Mr. Delaney's provided a very detailed account within his statement of the events of that night, and that has all been considered in its entirety.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, that will be admitted into the record.
I'm grateful. The next statement that I wish to put into the record is that of Ms. Viviana Rouleau, and the reference for that statement is IWS 161. And if we turn to page 7, we'll see that it's signed on the 18th of May 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask the entirety of that statement to put into the record. And she has 16 exhibits. These exhibits are with the reference VR1 to VR16, and the inquiry reference is IWS 163 for those exhibits as well.
Yes, thank you.
I'd ask they are admitted into the record. To provide context to Ms. Rouleau's statement, of which I do not propose to read the particular paragraphs, I'd say that Ms. Rouleau bought her flat on Barrington Walk in 2006, and at the time of the fire, she lived there with her partner, David O'Connell. He has also provided a statement to the inquiry, which I will put into the record in due course. I would draw your attention in particular to paragraphs 4 to 8, where she describes becoming aware of the fire and evacuating the property with her partner on that night. And that's what I propose to put into the record today.
Yes, right, thank you.
The next statement is that of David O'Connell, as you've heard, Ms. Rouleau's partner. And the reference for that statement is IWS 166. And turning to page 5 of that statement, it's signed on the 18th of May 2018 under a statement of truth, and I'd ask that the entirety of the statement's admitted into the record.
Yes.
He has one exhibit, DO1, and that reference is IWS 167. I'd also ask that as admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
Now, Mr. O'Connell is the partner of Miss Rouleau. He was also in the property on the night of the early morning of 14th June 2017. And like Miss Rouleau, he's given an account of the process of evacuating their property. This is provided at paragraph 2 to 6 of his statement. At paragraph 16, Mr. O'Connell also describes returning to the walkway at around 5 a.m. and finding that it was cordoned off.
Right. Yes, thank you.
The next statement that I will put into the record is that of Jacqueline Mcgrath. The reference for that statement is IWS 914. And this is signed at page 9 on the 15th of June 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask that her statement is put into the record, and there are no exhibits.
Thank you.
I would note that Miss Mcgrath had lived on Barrington Walk for 17 years at the time of the fire, and she lived there with her 2 children. At paragraph 10 to 17, she describes first becoming aware of the fire and waking her children up so that they could leave the property. And at paragraph 31 to 36, she describes being evacuated from the walkway by a police officer and a firefighter. And that's what I propose to refer to in that statement.
Right, thank you.
The next statement I will admit into the record is that of Alison Burke. The reference is IWS 277. And turning to page 20 of her statement, you'll see that it was signed on the 18th of May 2018 under a statement of truth. There is one exhibit, AB1, which is, and the reference for that is IWS 27722.
Yes.
And I would ask both the statement and the exhibit are admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
To provide context, Miss Burke lived on Barrington Walk with her parents, her brother and her son. They were original tenants of their flat and they'd lived there for over 40 years. Some particular paragraphs I would draw to your attention are those of paragraph 11 to 15. And in this part of her statement, Miss Burke describes how she became aware of the fire. And also at paragraph 29 to 30, she describes seeing a group of men who helped people out of the tower.
Yes.
She has also described the evacuation process for Barrington Walk at paragraph 50 to 55 of her statement. The next statement, and that's what I wish to draw to your attention in respect to that statement.
Thank you.
The next statement that I would ask to be admitted into the record is that of Muhammad Yahya. The reference is IWS 567. And turning to the last page, page 12, we'll see that it was signed on the 1st of June 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask that his statement is admitted into the record. He has 2 exhibits as well that I would ask to be put into the record. Those are MY 1 and 2. And the reference for those exhibits is our IWS 570. If that could be put into the record.
Yes, thank you very much.
I would also draw your attention and read from some particular excerpts of Mr. Yahya's statement. And before I do so, just to provide context, Mr. Yahya and his family had lived in Barrington Walk for over 20 years at the time of the fire. He had previously lived in flat 42 of Grenfell Tower before moving to Barrington Walk, and he moved to Grenfell Tower in 1986. At the time of the fire itself, he was living with his wife and 2 of his children, whereas 3 of his daughters lived in separate properties nearby. One daughter was Rabia Yahya, who has previously given evidence to this inquiry on the 30th of October, and he is her father. I would then draw your attention to page 3, paragraph 12, where I propose to pick up from his statement.
Yes.
He has said prior to this paragraph that he was at home on the evening of 13th of June. And he says at paragraph 12, "When I got home, everyone was resting. I went downstairs into mine and my wife's bedroom and started to unchanged from my clothes I wore to mosque. Within 20 minutes of me being back home, the house phone started ringing. Khadija answered, and it was my sister-in-law who lived opposite the tower. I could hear her screaming down the phone, shouting something like, 'The tower's on fire. Your daughter. Go get your daughter.' I was completely panicked at this point and was not sure what was going on. Khadija and I both ran upstairs to the balcony and opened the balcony door. I looked and I could see flames on the east side of the tower. It looked like it was around the 4th or 6th floor, but my view was hindered, so I couldn't see properly. My wife was screaming, 'My daughter, my daughter.' I was also screaming, which woke up Ikram and my son. Both of them ran over to us to find out what was going on. I just said we needed to leave. I was in full-on panic mode. Khadija grabbed on an abaya and headscarf that were hanging on the coat peg, and we all ran out of the front door of the flat. I had no phone or no money on me, but my son had taken the keys to the flat. I think this would have been around 12:55 to 1 a.m. My son ran down the corridor of the building to the fire exit, which was the exit closest to the tower from Barrington Walk. I followed him. I was literally about 6 meters away from the tower, facing the east side. I could see flames inside one of the flats around the 4th to the 6th floor. I ran down the stairs and I could see about 20 firemen outside the entrance of the tower, just standing there, as if they were waiting for something. I then suddenly saw the window to the flat suddenly smash and fall from the tower. The smoke was a white to grey colour, and then fire burst out. The fire was like a gas fire blue. There were no fire alarms going off at all. I could hear so many people screaming and shouting inside the tower. As I watched this happening, I was in complete disbelief and was petrified for my family in the tower. At this point, I went up to a policeman who was stood by the main entrance of the tower, and I explained to him that my daughter was alone in the tower with her 3 children, and so she wouldn't be able to bring them all down safely. He said I couldn't go in and started pushing me away. I became very frustrated and demanded that he let me in, and I kept repeating that I needed to go inside because my family were in there. The officer just kept saying I wasn't supposed to be standing here and that I needed to go away. I was so frustrated and couldn't control my anger because I was just desperate to get into the tower. I then proposed to pick up again from his statement on the following page,
Yes.
page 5, paragraph 19, and he gives a description there where he says, I looked at the tower and could just see blue fire shooting straight up the right column of the east side of the tower. I was speechless. I couldn't speak to anyone. I could see the fire continuing to rise up the right column, but then I saw the cladding just falling down off the tower. At the time, I didn't know it was called cladding, but it looked like some sort of material from outside of the building. I could hear the glass to the windows shattering too, and people were screaming for help. I would then propose to pick up again from his account on page 6. This is again the following page, paragraph 23. At this paragraph, he says, my son at some point had gone back to the flat to get our phones. Khadija passed me a phone and I spoke to Rabia on the phone, and I put the call on speakerphone so we could all hear her. She was still in the tower. I kept shouting at her, saying, come out. Why aren't you coming out? She said she couldn't as the smoke was so bad, and whenever she opened her front door, she couldn't see anything. She also said that the fireman had told her to stay inside. I was shouting at her, saying, don't listen to the fireman, come out. I could see the fire from outside, and I could see that it was approaching her flat, and yet the firemen were telling her to stay inside. I just couldn't understand it. I just thought to myself it was better for her to die trying than just burning alive, and not even trying to escape. I couldn't understand why she was being told to stay when I could see the fire was moving to where she was. I told her to wet her clothes or towels and to put them around herself and her children. No one had told me about this advice on the night. It was something that I already knew to do in the case of a fire. I told her to crawl when she came down the stairs and to walk like a blind person would, feeling the walls and to walk with her hands. I was trying to stay calm when I told her this. At one point, I remember she was saying her goodbyes to us all, saying sorry and to forgive her for whatever she had done. I was so upset and completely overwhelmed. I told her not to say goodbye and to get the towels wet whilst I was on the phone to her. She told me that the fire was now in her kitchen. I think I was on the phone to her in the flat for around 30 minutes before she left her flat. A lot of my family spoke to Rabia that night, including Khadija and my son. I couldn't hear any fire alarm going off in her flat while I was on the phone to her. Rabia later told me that they'd tested the fire alarm a couple of days before the fire. They had said that it was fine, but on the night of the fire, the alarm didn't go off. I find this very odd. The alarms in the corridor didn't go off either, as I would have heard them when I was on the phone to my daughter. Rabia had opened the front door and had the phone on speaker. She did this. It must have been around 2:30 a.m. From this point onwards, she didn't speak to me. I could just hear her footsteps shouting and screaming from others who must have been in the stairwell. I couldn't hear any fire alarms going off. Suddenly I heard loud screaming and crying from someone, but it was not Rabia. I could hear her telling someone to get down and was saying, follow me, follow me. I later found out, having spoken to Rabia, that she was recovering from the fire, that she had accidentally opened a door to someone else's flat. When she opened the door, she saw a man who was about to jump out the window. His wife and kids were stood next to him, trying to pull him down from the window. My daughter said she had helped to pull him down and then told him to follow her down the stairs. After this, I could just hear footsteps and screaming. Then suddenly I couldn't hear her anymore. That was it. I thought they had died. I was completely distraught and I broke down crying. My wife was crying hysterically, and when we couldn't hear Rabia anymore, she fainted. Someone started giving her water. Someone around the area gave me a chair to sit by threshold space. I just sat there, not knowing what was happening, and had completely lost hope. I thought she was gone. I was in complete disbelief and shock. Then about 10 to 15 minutes later, someone ran over to where I was sat and said they saw my daughter come out of the tower with her children, and that she was alive. I can't remember exactly who this was, but I think it was Khaled, my nephew. I couldn't believe it. I was so desperate for it to be true. I just needed to go where she was and see for myself. So they told me whereabouts she was, and I started rushing to where she was. I then finally pick up at paragraph 32. Mm-hmm. He went to the area where he knew Rabia was, and he could see her from a distance. And he says, I explained to a police officer who was keeping a line that I could see my daughter, and he asked if I was sure. He eventually let me pass, but no one else was allowed through the line. I ran over to my daughter, who was sat under a tree with her children. One child was not with them. I hugged her and cried. She could barely speak because of the smoke inhalation, and she was coughing a lot. One daughter was coughing a lot, but the other was just quiet. Their faces were black and smelt very strongly of smoke. I think she told me at this point that her son had come out of the tower, but she didn't know where he was. The paramedics asked us to go to a nearby pub, and we went in there and sat down. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Yes, very well, thank you.
There are two further statements from Barrington Walk residents that I would ask to put into the record. The next is that of Kim Monte, and the reference is IWS 659.
Yes.
And if we turn to the last page, page 7, you'll see that it's signed on the 6th of June 2018 under a statement of truth. There are no exhibits to this statement, and I'd ask that it is admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
I would note, to provide context to her statement, Ms. Monte lives in Barrington Walk with her son, and I draw your attention to paragraphs 3 to 22, where she sets out her recollection of the events of the 14th of June 2018, which provide detailed description of her observations of the night. The next statement I would then admit into the record, ask to be admitted into the record, is that of Saira Malik, and the reference is IWS 1087. And this statement, if you turn to page 8, is signed on the 15th of August 2018.
Yes.
And the statement of truth is in paragraph 2 on the first page of that statement. She has provided a number of exhibits as well, and those exhibits, the first references are SM1, is the internal reference. The external reference is IWS 144. Exhibit SM2 has reference IWS 154. Exhibit SM3 has reference IWS 143. And then she's also provided a number of videos and photos with a separate reference of WA0012, which is reference IWS 151. WA0013 has inquiry reference IWS 152. WA308 is inquiry reference IWS 142. WA306 has reference IWS 156. WA305 has an inquiry reference IWS 146. WA304 reference IWS 153. WA303 reference IWS 157. WA309 has reference IWS 155. WA310 302 has reference IWS 147. WA 301 has reference IWS 145. And WA 30 has reference IWS 149. I would ask the statement and all those exhibits are admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you very much.
To provide context, Miss Malik lived in Barrington Walk with her son. She became aware of the fire at an early stage on the 14th of June 2018. She also called 999 to report the fire. At paragraph 38 of her statement, she describes being advised by a neighbour that the police were then evacuating the building. Shortly thereafter, she left Barrington Walk. Those are the statements of the residents of Barrington Walk that I would ask are admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you very much.
I would next turn to another finger block of that surrounded Grenfell Walk, and that's of Testerton Walk.
Yes.
There are 16 inquiry witness statements that I propose to put into the record today. The first is that of Joseph Bryan.
Yes.
And the reference is IWS 553. Turning to page 8, the last page, we can see that it was signed on the 8th of May 2018 under a statement of truth. There are no exhibits to this statement, and I would ask that it's admitted into the record.
Yes.
Mr. Joseph Bryan moved into Testerton Walk in 2003. His girlfriend, Bit, lived with him since 2013. He's provided a detailed account of his observations on the night of 14th of June at paragraph 11 to 34. He states in his statement that he returned home at 2:30 to see the fire, and at paragraph 20 he describes being told by a neighbour that the police were evacuating the block soon after he had returned home, and he had evacuated then.
Yes.
And the next statement I wish to put into the record is that of Sarah Mensah. The reference of that statement is IWS 590. If we turn to page 9 of her statement, we can see that it was signed on the 5th of May 2018 under a statement of truth. I'd ask her statement is admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
There are 2 exhibits to her statement. The first exhibit is SM1, the second SM2, and they both have an inquiry reference of IWS 652. If you excuse me 1 minute.
Yeah, of course. No, you take a moment.
Now, Miss Mensah lived in Testerton Walk all her life. She said on the 14th of June 2018 she lived in the flat with her father, her husband and her 2 daughters. If you excuse me, sir.
Do you want to take a pause for a moment?
I'll just have another
sip of water and... Yeah.
Now, as stated, Miss Mensah she lived in the flat with her father, her husband and her 2 daughters. Her father was a leaseholder of the flat and had lived there since 1978. At paragraph 9 of her statement, she picks up her account of her experiences of the early morning of 14th June 2018.
Yes.
And she describes a neighbour telling her to evacuate her flat at paragraph 18 of her statement. I would also note at paragraph 21, she describes seeing the fire spread up the tower.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, she said, it looked like someone had thrown oil on it because of how much it had gone up. The next statement I would ask to put into the record is that of Susan Al-Saadi.
Yes.
And the reference for that statement is IWS 598. If we could turn to page 10 of that statement, you can see that it's signed on the 5th of June 2018. under a statement of truth. I'd ask that that statement is admitted into the record.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There are 7 exhibits to this statement. AL-S 1 to AL-S 7, and they all share the inquiry reference of IWS 599. I'd ask they are also admitted into the record. I would then propose to read some parts of her statement. Before doing so, I'd note, just to provide context, that Miss Susan Al-Saadi lived in Testerton Walk since she was 5 years old. On the 14th of June, she was living with her mother, stepfather, and her little brother, and her older sister lived with them half the time. Now, picking up her account from page 2, paragraph 7, I would read that she says, "I was at home asleep on the night of the fire. I did not hear anything until just before 1:30 a.m. While I was in bed, I was woken up by the general voices and shouting coming from outside. I got out of bed and looked out of my bedroom window, which looks out onto the green between Testerton Walk and Barrington Walk. I could not see anything from my window. I could hear people shouting fire, so I woke up my mum and stepdad and I went upstairs to the sitting room to get a better viewpoint of the green. I still couldn't see anything, so I went back downstairs to ask them if they could see anything. We looked outside the window again, but could not see anything. At this point, my stepdad got a phone call from his nephew who lived across the road from Latimer Road Station, asking if we were okay and whether we could see the fire. Attached to our sitting room is a balcony that looks onto the green between Testerton Walk and Barrington Walk. We went outside onto the balcony. It was only when we were standing on the balcony that we could see Grenfell Tower because it was at a perpendicular angle to our windows. At this point, we could see some light and smoke, and we could hear fire alarms and sirens, so we thought the situation was under control. Within half an hour, we could see a tiny flame on the top right-hand side of the tower as we looked straight towards the tower. I would describe it as the corner closest to Barrington Walk, marked on exhibit SAS1. I saw people in the windows shouting for help. I could see the electric lights in the tower flickering on and off. In the lower floors, I saw people tying bed sheets together to try and escape, but I did not understand why. To me, it looked as though it was a tiny localized fire because I could see only the top right-hand corner was alight. I could see that the smoke was coming from behind the building, but little did we know that at this point, the other side of the tower was engulfed in fire. I could hear sirens and helicopters, so I knew that I did not have to call the emergency services. I'm not sure whether I could see any fire engines at this point. I did not see any police at this point, but it may have been because from our view from the balcony was obscured by the trees. At just after 2:15 a.m., I got a phone call from a friend who lives in Ladbroke Grove. She asked if I could see the fire, and I asked whether she could. She asked, "Are you okay? Have you been evacuated?" I told her no, and she said that our neighbour, her friend, who lives on the ground floor of Testerton Walk, had been told to evacuate. She said that she thought we should get out. I said okay. I told my mum and stepdad what my friend had said, and we decided that if they knew about the fire in Ladbroke Grove, and that if our neighbour had been told to get out, then we should get out. But I still didn't understand why or how they could see the fire that far away. We were still standing on our balcony looking at the tower. There seemed to be a sudden blunt change when all the lights, instead of flickering, just turned off and didn't come back on again. People stopped coming to the windows and shouting for help. This was very eerie. This would have been at about 2:23 a.m. I know this because I took some photographs on my phone at this time. These photographs are exhibited to my statement from exhibits SA-S2 to 5. I went downstairs and got dressed in 5 to 10 minutes. We woke my brother up, and my older sister Rowan was not in the flat on the evening. My mum, stepdad and brother all headed downstairs. I stayed behind to knock on our neighbours' doors. I knew no one had knocked on our doors to evacuate us, as my brother had not woken up until we took him downstairs. There are 6 flats in our hub on the 2nd floor where our flat is. I did not knock on one of our neighbours' doors because I knew that he had recently passed away. I knocked on the other 4 doors and 2 of them answered. I told them there was a fire in Grenfell Tower and we had to leave the building. I then headed downstairs and outside to meet my mum, my stepdad, and my brother. I went down the ramp that leads from Testerton Walk to Whitchurch Road. There were lots of people gathered outside. I did not see any fire engines, firefighters, or police at this point. The trees were very green given the time of year, so you could barely see through the leaves to see the tower. All I could tell was that there was a lot of light, as I could see the light reflecting off the windows of Hurstway Walk. My mum, stepdad, and brother and I sat on a bench on the stage ramps by Whitchurch Road for a while. We could not see many emergency vehicles from there at this time. The corner of Whitchurch Road and Bramley Road had already been closed off for some time, about 2 to 3 weeks because of gasworks, and access to this area is generally terrible, since the roads are so narrow, so I think they couldn't get down there. At one point, my stepdad and I walked to the green between Barrington Walk and Testerton Walk to see what was happening. We got to about halfway along the green towards the tower and stood there for a few minutes. I could not see any firefighters or policemen on this side of the tower. This was the first time that I saw the fire properly. At this point, the entire face of the tower was engulfed in flames. Although there were trees between us and the tower, through the trees you could see that everything was engulfed in flames. From here I could hear noises. I wouldn't describe them as explosions, but it was like things were giving away. There were crackling noises as you would usually hear from a fire, and sounds of things falling. I could see red-hot flames. Some were sparks, like others seemed like there were streams of liquid flames. There was debris falling everywhere, which was also a light. In hindsight, this debris was the cladding, but I didn't know that at the time. I would describe it looking like pieces of styrofoam or burning paper floating through the air. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Right, thank you very much.
So may I very briefly turn my back before I put the next statement into the record?
Yes.
I'm grateful. The next statement that I would wish to put into the record is that of Jean Salabi, and the reference for that statement is IWS 648.
Yes.
If we turn to page 10 of that statement, we can see that it's signed on and dated on the 4th of June 2018 under a statement of truth. There are no exhibits to be put into the record with this statement.
Right.
By way of context, Ms. Salabi lived in Testerton Walk for over 30 years and describes having many friends and family in the area. Her 2 sons, Darren and Mark, lived with her on the 14th of June 2017. At paragraphs 6 to 24, she set out her experiences of the events of 14th June 2018. Her daughter lived nearby with her children, and at paragraph 7 of her statement, she describes her daughter waking her up to alert her to the fire that night. And that's where I propose to stop. The next statement I then wish to refer to is that of Mr. Abdesalam Hedioued. The reference to that statement is IWS 651. And if we turn to page 3, we can see that it's signed and dated on the 4th of June 2018 under a statement of truth.
Yes, thank you.
By way of context, he lived alone in Testerton Walk since 2010 or 2011, and at paragraph 7 he says he was alerted to the fire by his sister Rashida, who called him that night, and she then came to pick him up and take him to her place. The next statement I then propose to ask to be admitted into the record is that of John Gerald Folan.
Yes.
Mr. Folan's statement's reference is IWS 132. Turning to page 15 of his statement, it's signed on the 17th of May 2018 under a statement of truth.
Yes.
There are no exhibits to the statement. I'd ask it's admitted into the record. And I will also propose to read some excerpts from his statement. Before I do so, I note that Mr. Folan lived in Testerton Walk all his life with his father, who is now deceased, and his mother, Mary Kate Folan, who's provided a statement to the inquiry as well.
Yes.
And he also lived with his sister and his brother. Mr. Folan set out his recollections of the events of 14th June from paragraph 18. And I would propose to pick up that account starting at paragraph 18 as well, on page 6.
Thank you.
Now he says, that night I was in my room around 10:30. My bedroom and my mother's bedroom and the bathroom on the first floor at entry level, where you come into our flat, but other flats in the block are laid in reverse. Our flat is 3-bedroom, but there are studios, but I believe the majority of the flats are 2 bedrooms. I am always a light sleeper and woke up at approximately 1 a.m. hearing the words fire and people shouting and running across the grass areas outside our blocks, which are known and called the Greens. I looked out of the window and saw 3 or 4 people running across the Greens towards a gate. I noticed lots of lights were on in Barrington Walk. I looked at my bedside clock. They were shouting, "Let me out," as a gate on the Green they thought was locked, closed, which was in fact not. My mum was not sleeping well and had been mainly in her bedroom, as she couldn't negotiate the stairs that easily. Then as her arm was very painful and she couldn't lie down properly, and she'd hurt her foot, which had swollen up. I checked on my mum, and then my brother, Stephen, was awake. His bedroom is on the ground floor, where our kitchen, living room and toilet is. All the flats are made with windows on one side which overlook the Greens, and the other side flats faces into the communal area of each block. My brother came up to our floor and went outside onto the walkway ramps to see what was all the noise was about, and if there was a fire. If so, where was it? He came back into the flat and told my mum and I that the Grenfell Tower was on fire. It was roughly about 1, I estimate. There was a little bit of smoke in the communal areas, and you could smell smoke on the walkways. I could hear some sirens in the distance as Bramley Road was closed for gas repairs between Bramley Road and St Anne's Villas, so they couldn't get down there. I heard a helicopter which seemed to be on the scene quite quickly. By this time, my mum was listening to Radio LBC and started to hear news about a fire in West London. We turned on the TV in the sitting room and there was news of a fire, although the location was vague, as it simply said there was a fire in a tower block in West London. Lights were coming on in the neighbouring blocks, which was unusual, at about 1:30 to 1:45, and we could hear frenzied footsteps in the communal area, which is lino. This meant that you could hear the footsteps, and the walls are very thin and not soundproofed properly. We had our front door ajar, and Stephen mainly kept popping out to see what was going on. We were still all in our nightwear originally, but Stephen got dressed by then, around 1:45 a.m, and I could see this on my clock quickly, as it was a warm night. I helped my mum with putting her shoes and putting a dressing gown on over her arm sleeve, which I helped put on too. Stephen urged me to get dressed, and I quickly put on jeans, t-shirt, jumpers and trainers. I popped down to the kitchen where we kept my mother's medication, as I was thinking ahead and wondering whether I should pack a suitcase with it in. I went to the sitting room and turned on the television, and there was breaking news reporting a fire in West London, but no images. I saw 3 firemen walking past our front door, who I don't believe were carrying any breathing equipment. I opened the door and we saw other residents in their nightwear leaving the building. I saw a couple of policemen, and someone had knocked on our door, so I presumed it was a policeman. Stephen asked a passing policeman in the walkway whether it was just the bottom part of the 300 block, which is closest to the tower, or the whole block, including the section where we live. He replied, "Everyone out." We all then left the flat. We locked the front door. I took my mobile phone, wallet and house keys. My brother took the same. We all congregated where the benches on the walkway, where the benches are on the walkway. By that time, policemen were all outside the main entrances to the walkway. I looked at my watch and it was around 2:30 a.m. I proposed to stop there and pick up again his account on the following page, page 10 at paragraph 36.
Yes.
Here he describes his observations of the fire when he was outside the block. And he says, the fire had really taken hold by this stage, and we could clearly see it from the only place to sit, which were the benches. You could see the reflections of the flames on the windows on Hurstway Walk. You could hear sort of crackling noises popping too, which I thought was cladding coming off the building, as we could see debris falling from the building. I was moving around at this time. This debris was of varying sizes and was alight. The debris was falling from the high levels. You could hear some shouting, whether it was from those asking for help or people at the base of the tower block. This was around 2:45, 3 a.m. The flames were coming from the 5th or 6th floor, almost reaching the top, and the building started to be engulfed in large flames. Smoke was coming from under the walkways themselves, where the garages were. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
All right, thank you.
The next statement I would ask to be admitted into the record is that of Mary Folan, and that, as you've heard, is Mr. Folan's mother. Her statement is IWS 1088. On page 11, we see that it's signed on the 21st of August 2018
Yes.
under a statement of truth. I'd ask that as admitted into the record, and she also has two exhibits that I would also ask to be admitted into the record, and those are reference MF1 and MF2 with an inquiry reference of IWS 136 for both of those exhibits.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Miss Folan moved into Testerton Walk with her husband in May 1976, and she raised her daughter Kate and her sons Stephen and John in Testerton Walk. She's provided a detailed account of the events which are set out at paragraph 31 to 47 of her statement, and she also says that she was woken by police banging on the doors saying to get out as there was a fire. She remained outside on a bench nearby until she went to St. Clement's Church the following morning. Now, the next statement I would ask to be admitted into the record is that of Marcia Levy, and the reference is IWS 430. There are no
Yes,
exhibits
thank
to this statement. And if I may refer you to page 16, you'll see that it's signed on the 15th of May 2018 under a statement of truth. By way of context, I would note that Marcia Levy had lived in Lancaster West Estate for 28 years. She first moved to Upper Grenfell Walk and then later moved to Testerton Walk in 1994. At paragraph 9, Marcia Levy sets out her past experience in the area, and she says that she previously worked as a volunteer for the Lancaster West Estate Management Board, and she was also trustee for the Lancaster West Residents Association. For the events of 14th June 2017, she said at that time she was living with her sons Aaron and Joshua, and her daughters Naomi and Rihanna, and also her grandson. She's provided her account at paragraphs 19 to 47 of the statement, and at paragraph 24 she specifically describes evacuating her flat at around 1:30 a.m. after seeing a policeman knocking on people's doors and telling them to leave.
Yes.
She mentions that she knew a number of people who did not survive the fire, including Raymond Bernard, who is known to as Moses, Stephen Powers, and Nadia Shuker, who she used to work with, and her daughter was also friends with Yassin al-Wahabi.
Yes, very well.
I would ask that's admitted into the record.
Yes, certainly.
The next statement I would turn to is that of Cesar Ranito. Mr. Ranito's statement is IWS 532, and he has three exhibits to that statement, which are reference IWS 530. Mr. Ranito's statement is signed on page 8 under a statement of truth, and it's dated the 18th of May 2018. I would ask that his statement and the three exhibits are admitted into the record.
Yes, good, thank you.
Grateful. By way of context for his statement, Mr. Ranito moved into Testerton Walk in April 2001 with his 2 children and his wife, and at the time of the fire he was living with his wife, Isabel Ranito, only. She has also provided a statement to the inquiry, which I'll put into the record in due course, and he's described the events of 14th of June from paragraphs 5 to 21 of his statement. I would note that at paragraph 8, he describes alerting all his neighbours to the fire, and he decided to self-evacuate with his wife. I've referred to the statement of his wife, Isabel Ranito, and I'd now ask that is also admitted to the record. The reference for that statement is IWS 533.
Yes.
There are no exhibits to the statement, but you'll see on page 7 that it's signed on the 18th of May 2018 under a statement of truth.
Thank you.
I'd ask her statement is admitted into the record. She's provided a similar account to that of Cesar Ranito regarding confirmation that she's lived in Testerton Walk since April 2001. and she says that her 2 children did not live with them at the time of the fire. Her account of the events of 14th of June are set out from paragraphs 6 to 22. I'd also note that at paragraph 13 of her statement, she describes moving away from the towers, those black smoke coming from the tower, making it very difficult for her to breathe. Now, the next statement is that of Hulya Deniz Yagsi, which is reference IWS 641.
Yes, thank you.
This statement is signed on page 12, and it's dated the 5th of June 2018, and it's signed under Statement of Truth. I'd ask that the statement is admitted into the record, and I'd note there's no exhibits.
Yes.
By
Yes,
way of
sir.
by way of context, she'd lived in Testerton Walk since she was 4 years old, and as of 14th June 2017, her father, mother, brother, and 2 children also lived with her. Her brother Ismail Yagsi has also provided a statement to the inquiry. Her account of the events of 14th of June 2017 are set out from paragraph 5 to 24, and at paragraphs 6 and 7, she specifically described being woken up by noises outside her flat, and then she observed the fire from her patio. At paragraph 18, I would note that she described that her parents were unable to drive away from the area as their car was blocked in, and she says at paragraph 23 and 24 that her parents and children remained outside on Surdar Road until St. Clement's Church opened its doors, and they went there. I've referred to her brother Ishmael, and he's also
Yes.
provided a statement. I would now ask that's admitted into the record.
Yes, thank
The
you.
reference for that statement is IWS 549. It's signed on page 10 on the 1st of June 2018 under a statement of truth. I would ask that the statement is admitted into the record, and I would note that there are 7 exhibits to this statement, IY1 to IY7, and they all share a reference IWS 547, and ask those exhibits are also admitted
Yes.
into the record.
Thank you.
He's noted that he also lived in Testerton Walk with his parents, sister, and his sister's children, and he sets out his experiences of the 14th of June 2017 from paragraph 6 to 29. Paragraph 7, he also describes being woken by the sound of screaming, and he describes in particular the fire spread at paragraph 11 of his statement. The next statement I would then ask to be admitted into the record is that of Tamora Herjak Oni.
Yes, thank you.
That statement has the reference IWS 896. There are no exhibits to this statement,
Right.
and you will note at page 5 that it's signed on the 28th of June 2018 under a statement of truth, and I therefore ask that it's admitted into the record.
Yes.
I would also note that she has lived in Testerton Walk since 2000 with her 3 daughters, and she's provided her recollection of the events of 14th June from paragraph 2 to 5 of her statement. The next statement I would then ask to be admitted into the record is that of Paul Norbert.
Yes.
His his statement has reference IWS 667. There are no exhibits to this statement, and if I could refer you to page 7, you'll see that it's signed on the 2nd of June 2018 under a statement of truth, and I'd ask that it's admitted to the record.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Paul Norbert says that he grew up in the area around Grenfell Tower and moved into Testerton Walk on the 1st of January 1997, and you'll find his account of the events of 14th of June at paragraphs 5 to 13 of his statement.
Yes.
Ishmael Hadgay has also provided a statement to the inquiry, and that's the next statement I'd ask to be admitted.
Yes.
The reference is IWS 200. He has 2 exhibits that I would ask to be put into the record as well. Before turning to those exhibits, I would note at page 10 of his statement, it's signed on the 18th of May 2018 under a statement of truth. And his exhibits are IH1, which has reference IWS 199, and IH3, which has an inquiry reference IWS 197. I'd ask that the statement and those two exhibits are admitted into the record.
Yes, certainly, yes.
I'd note that Mr. Hadgay lived in Testerton Walk for 11 years before the fire. He also knew a number of people who lived in Grenfell Tower who did not survive the fire, including Noura Jamal and her family, Fatia Ali Ahmed Al-Sanusi, Hassan and his wife. He knew Hassan who survived, but his wife Rania Ibrahim, who did not. He's given an account of the events of 14th of June from paragraphs 30 to 38 of his statement.
Right, thank you.
Now, the final statement from a Testerton Walk resident that I would ask to be admitted into the record is that of Iman Hijazi. And the reference is IWS 639. That statement's signed on page 10 on the 5th of June 2018 under a statement of truth. There are no exhibits to the statement, and I'd ask that it's admitted into the record.
Yes.
I would also note for the record that Iman Hijazi was a resident of Testerton Walk since the 5th of November 1997, and she lived there with her husband and her daughter and her son, and she's provided a detailed account of the events of 14th of June from paragraph 4 to 38 of her statement. In particular, at paragraph 22, she says that her family decided to evacuate their flat after receiving a call from her friend who told her that people had been evacuated from the walkways, including their neighbour. That is the last of the statements of, well, I believe there's one more statement from a Walkway resident, but those are the last of the statements from the 4 finger blocks of the Walkway residents I would ask to be admitted into the record for this moment.
Very well. Well, thank you very much.
I would just note that although I have only read some excerpts and have not read from all the statements have been read and considered in their entirety, and the entire statements are admitted into the record. So whilst those are the Walkway residents, that does not conclude our business in respect of the residents. There are a few other statements from both survivors and the bereaved that we still need to put into the record. I will continue with 2 more before I will hand over to Mr. Rowett to conclude with those statements.
Right, well, just give me a moment, please. Yes, thank you. Where are we going next?
The first of the 2 statements that I will be asking you to admit into the record is that of Karen Abood. She's provided 2 statements to the inquiry.
Yes.
The first is reference IWS 130, and the second statement is IWS, which is a supplementary statement, 1123. IWS 130 contains the statement and the exhibits KA1 to KA7. And I'd ask both those statements and those exhibits are admitted into the record. Before I do so, I would just very quickly note that IWS 130 is signed on page 11, and it's dated the 17th of May 2018.
Yes.
And that's signed under a statement of truth. The second statement is IWS 1123 is signed on page 2, and it's dated the 5th of October 2018. And I'd ask that is also admitted into the record along with the exhibits that I've already referred to.
Yes, thank you very much.
I would propose to read some relevant passages from her statement into the record. Before I do so, I would note, just by way of context, that Miss Abood lived at number 92 Grenfell Tower with her 2 children. She had 2 sons, and she'd lived there since September 2015. Both her sons were present with her on the night of the fire, and I would propose to pick up her account of the events of that night on page 5, paragraph 23.
Yes, thank you.
At this paragraph she says, "On the night of the fire, I was at home with the children. I was woken at 1:30 a.m. by people shouting outside at the bottom of the flats. It was exactly 1:30. I looked at my clock. I thought it was people fighting, so I called the police. The operator asked me if I lived at Grenfell Tower, and when I said yes, said that there is a fire upstairs. She told me something along the lines that I should stay inside, and the firemen were dealing with it and would come and get me. My statement to the police says I was told to try and leave, but I think it was all a bit mixed up because later in the statement I say I was told to stay. I'm not going to go into any more detail about this first call in this statement because my memory of it is not good, and I do not want to rely on my memory. I would rather rely on the audio tape of the call. However, to date, I've been unable to obtain this. In the meantime, I'm submitting this statement as I want to assist the inquiry by stress that I'm very concerned to obtain a copy of the audio tapes of all my calls, as these are obviously the most accurate record of what I said and what was said to me. Anyway, I remember I looked out of my bedroom window, which is on the south side of the tower, and could not see any fire at that stage. I also remember I asked the police to send someone with a mask because of my asthma. They said they would let the firemen know. To be clear, I'm saying the police, but I guess it's possible it was the fire people I was talking to. I did ask for police when I first called, though. So it all seemed fine. They were going to come and get me. I wasn't worried at all at this stage. I called my friend Dunya to come and pick us up so we could stay with her. She only lives 5 minutes away. She started shouting that I should leave the building. It turns out she was downstairs outside the building, though I did not know this at the time. My social worker also called. She lives very close to the tower. She started shouting over the phone, telling me to leave. Because of what I've been told by the 999 people, I just thought, calm down. I woke the children and then made a cup of coffee in my Starbucks cup and had a cigarette out of the window. So I was pretty relaxed. I could hear the police and firemen outside, so I knew they were there and believed it was just a case of waiting for them to get me. My recollection is that I called 999 again a few times because the firefighters didn't come. I can't recall the details of the number of calls or what I said. Again, I want to rely on the recordings of these calls rather than my memory for the reasons I've already given. My recollection is that in one of these calls, the operator advised me to leave the flat if I could. I know that we went to the front door to see what it would be like if we tried to get out without the firemen, and I think I did this because we were told to try and get out, but I can't be sure about that. Anyway, we definitely did this, and I can't remember the time. The whole hallway was covered in thick smoke top to bottom. It was white. It didn't have a smell. It was not so thick I couldn't see my kids, but it stung our eyes. And it was thick enough that I couldn't see anything further away from me, like the doors or the walls. We went to the stairs. We could not breathe properly. The smoke was stinging our eyes and the kids were crying. I opened the stairs doors thinking it might only be in the lobby, but it was worse than the stairs. It was thick with smoke. The lights were off, it was dark, you could see and feel the smoke in your eyes and when you breathed. It didn't look safe to go down, and my kids were crying, so we ran back into the flat. My older son says I couldn't find the keys, and they were yelling at me to open the door and let them back in because of the smoke, but I don't remember that. I got into my bedroom. The boys went to their bedroom. They were watching from the window. We couldn't see much, but we could see people in the ambulances. Then I went to their room. My recollection is that I called 999 again and told them we couldn't get out. They said not to worry, someone was coming to get us. So at this stage I was thinking I should stay because of waiting for the firemen who I had been told were coming. I didn't want my kids to get hurt. I thought it was just too risky to try and go without the firemen. My older son called 999 too. I rely on the transcripts of his calls at 1:57:45, which is LFB 335, and 2:38:54, LFB 370, and 2:57:59, which is LFB 391, for a first-hand account of what was going on in our flat at each of these times. From about 2:30, I saw bits of the building on fire falling down past our windows. I saw this from all the windows as I moved between rooms. Now we were getting really scared. But where were the firemen? Closer to 3, I saw flames bursting like explosions from the kitchen window as I looked down. Also closer to 3, I could see the building was on fire from my kitchen looking down. Smoke started coming in from under the door. It was quite a lot. The 999 people told me to put on the fan to help my kids with their breathing, but this didn't seem to help. My elder son says that at one point a firefighter was squirting water on a ladder right outside the kitchen window, and that he opened outside a kitchen window, and he opened the window and asked for help. He says the fireman said, "Close your windows, block the window and stay there." I don't know what time this was. Sometime around 3, I could hear my elder son, on the phone to 999 people asking for help and crying. A short time later, I noticed black smoke coming through the children's bedroom window. It was coming under the door too. We were struggling to breathe by now. I began thinking that we were going to have to leave with or without the firemen. I called 999 again and told them that black smoke is coming into my flat and I'd been told to stay because help is coming. I rely on the transcript of this call, LFB 402. I was desperate by now. That is when the operator said, "Do not wait, you do not have time, it will be too late." The operator said to put wet towels on our faces and to make our way downstairs. He said it was our last chance, so that is what we did. I got towels, dipped in water, and got the children to put them over their heads. We went to the front door, and there was a lot of smoke coming through the gap underneath. We went to the door several times, but couldn't go out. The smoke was too thick. At this point, I really feared for my life and the life of my kids. I really did not know if we were going to make it. My elder son has told me since that he had lost hope by this time, but I was still on the phone to the operator, and he kept saying, "You've got to get out now." He kept telling me I couldn't have done it but for him. I told the kids we just had to do it. My younger son was saying he couldn't go. My elder son remembers screaming at him, "We have to go." I had to pull him out and told him to hold on to me. My elder son says he has no shoes on, just bare feet. I can't believe that now. It just shows what a state I was in by then. As I say, the operator kept saying this was our last chance, and we had to get to the staircase. So we went back out. I was leading the way with the kids holding on. My elder son was behind me and my youngest son was by my side. We got into the lobby area and I couldn't see the lifts because of the smoke. It was thick black smoke. It was burning so you could not open your eyes. It smelt like burning electric. I got to the door that leads to the stairs and I pushed my elbow against the door to open it. The stairwell was dark and I could smell plastic burning. It was difficult to breathe. I could not see anything. The smoke was thick and hot. My eldest son remembers this too. It felt like the stairway was hot too, and also slippery. I did not hear anything or see anyone in the stairwell. My elder son says that he remembers we went down with a Japanese couple, but I don't remember them. I just kept going. At a particular floor, I think the second or third, I started stepping over things. I don't know what it was. On the third floor, I could hear people shouting, "Come down," and I could see better. A fireman came upstairs and pulled me by my hand and asked me to go downstairs. But at this point, I thought I had lost my sons and told the fireman I had to go back upstairs to find them. He said I had to come down. I lost my younger son on the second floor. I thought he'd died. But when I got to the first floor, I saw one of the firemen carrying him and giving him oxygen. When I got down to the lobby, there was no smoke there. I could see between 3 to 5 firemen. The fireman with my younger son took him and me outside. I was beside myself about my elder son. I gave the details for my elder son to the fireman and told them that my elder son was behind me on the stairs. The fireman radioed other firemen outside the Grenfell Tower with his details, and sometime later, it felt like about 5 minutes because I was so terrified about him, but I know now that in reality from the CCTV images from the lobby, it was a bit over a minute. I saw another fireman carrying him out the building. Once we were all together, we sat outside and the London ambulance service was giving us oxygen. And after about 30 minutes, the London ambulance service took us to hospital. I attached this statement marked KA 5 to 7, the first page of our ambulance records from the night, which show that we all suffered the effect of smoke inhalation with smoke residue around our mouths and nostrils and with singed nasal hair. My youngest son's record, KA 5, shows that he was in a state of shock. I remember he couldn't talk, and my oldest son's record, KA 7, shows that he had a sore throat from the smoke. My record is at KA 6, and that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
All right, thank you very much.
The final statement I will read into the record before handing over to Mr. Rawat is that of Adriana Ramirez, and that's reference IWS 1116.
Yes.
And if I could turn to the last page of that statement, which is at page 6, and you will note that it's signed on the 5th of October 2018 under a statement of truth. I would ask that her statements admitted into the record, and I would then propose to read some paragraphs from a statement which give her account of the events of the 14th of June.
Very well.
If I may pick up at page 4, paragraph 18.
Thank you.
Mr. Ramirez says, for the past 15 years or so, I've worked as a housekeeper with a family in Kensington. On Tuesday, 13th June 2017, I worked at their home until about 2 or 3 p.m. and then went home. I saw Jessica at home when she returned from school. Then Jessica went to the Kensington Leisure Centre to use the gym, and I went to my second job as an office cleaner in East London. I left our home at about 6:30 p.m. That was the last time I saw Jessica alive. After I finished my cleaning job, I stopped home, checked on Jessica, and then stepped out briefly to go to the home of my friend, Avi. Her child was sick and I was going to take medicine. Avi lives in Ladbroke Grove. Just after I arrived at Avi's, Ramiro called my mobile phone. I didn't answer his call as it was the early hours in the morning. Shortly after this, though, I received a call from Melanie. She was crying and told me there was a fire at Grenfell. She said she was at the building trying to get in, but she couldn't. I immediately booked an Uber to pick me up and take me to Grenfell Tower. A few minutes later, while I was in the Uber, I got a call from a number that my mobile phone didn't recognize. It was Jessica. She said there was a fire and that she was on the landing on the 18th floor. I could hear other voices in the background. I told her to run down the stairs and out the building as quickly as she could, and that I would be downstairs waiting for her. She was crying, but she said okay. By this point, I was panicking. The line was clear, and I don't remember hearing fire alarms in the background, although I may not have noticed, given my emotional state. Jessica wasn't coughing or struggling to breathe. I remember that I received a phone call at 1:19 a.m., but I've been told that Ramiro is certain that he tried to call me only after he escaped the tower, and that the CCTV image shows him leaving the building at 1:21 a.m. If his recollection and timestamp on the CCTV image are correct, and Jessica called me after Ramiro and Melanie did, then Jessica's first call to me must have been later than 1:19 a.m. I later found out that Jessica called me from Berkeley Eftom's mobile phone. About 10 minutes later, I received another phone call from Jessica from the same mobile phone number as before. That was the last time I spoke to Jessica. By that time, I had gotten out of the Uber and was running down Lancaster Road towards Grenfell Tower. I could see the smoke and flames. The second call from Jessica was very brief, as the line soon cut off. I remember asking Jessica where she was and telling her to come downstairs. She was panicked and kept repeating, "Come get me, come get me." She sounded terrified. I remember her saying she was on her way down. The phone then cut out. I believe that I told the police that Jessica told me on the second call that she was on her way downstairs, but this is not in my Metropolitan Police statement for some reason. I tried calling Jessica back several times. The line rang, but no one answered. I spent the following hours with Melanie and Ramiro, watching as the fire overtook the building. I did not enter or attempt to enter Grenfell Tower on the night of the fire. And that's where I propose to stop with that statement.
Right. Thank you very much.
So I will now hand over to Mr. Rawat to continue the statements.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Mr. Rawat.
Thank you, sir. The first statement I would like to move to is at IWS 401163, please. This is a statement of Thomas Etienne, who lived in Testerton Walk. If we go to page 3 of the statement, it has a statement of truth, is signed and is dated the 17th of October 2018. Mr. Etienne has provided the inquiry with 4 exhibits, internally referenced TE1 to TE4, which are 2 photographs and 2 video exhibits.
Yes.
For the record, the references for these exhibits are IWS 1159 to IWS 1162. I don't propose to read out from the statement, but can provide a short summary as follows. As I've said, Mr. Etienne is a resident of Teston Walk, and as he explains, a friend of Helen Gebremeskel, who you will recall, sir, gave evidence to the inquiry on the 6th of November 2018. In the statement at paragraph 5 to 6, Mr. Etienne sets out his telephone contact with Helen Gebremeskel whilst she was in the tower. And I'd ask that the statement and its accompanying exhibits be admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
The next statement we turn to is at IWS 50478. This is the statement of a witness who has been given anonymity by the inquiry and therefore is known by the cipher CCC. The statement has no exhibits accompanying it, but if we go to page 4 of the statement, it carries a statement of truth and is signed and dated the 17th of May 2018. CCC lived in a walkway connected with Grenfell and describes at paragraphs 4 to 6 waking up, realising that there was a fire and then leaving the property. And that's all I propose to say about that statement, save to ask that it be formally admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you very much.
Can I now have on the screen IWS 50314, please? This is the statement of Yusuf Saig. If we go, please, to page 7 of the statement.
Yes.
The statement is dated the 18th of May 2018, carries a statement of truth and is signed. Mr. Saig explains in his statement that he'd lived in Barrendon Walk for around 11 years by the time of the fire, and he sets out his account of what he witnessed on the night. What also needs to be said is he has also provided the inquiry with a number of video recordings that he took on the night. And for the record, these can be found at inquiry references IWS 574 to IWS 586. And I'd ask that Mr. Saig's statement be formally admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
I now turn, Mr. Chairman, to the statements of a number of residents and survivors of the fire from the tower itself. And the first of these is at IWS 6067.
Yes.
And that is the statement of Ruqayyata Mamadou. There are no exhibits accompanying the statement, but if we go to page 11, we can see that it is dated the 13th of April 2018, signed and carries a statement of truth.
Yes.
I don't propose to read from the statement, but in brief outline, Ms. Mamadou confirms that she lives in flat 2 in Grenfell Tower at the time of the fire, and explains at paragraph 25 how she first became aware of the fire at about 12:30 a.m. She then, at paragraphs 29 to 33, explains how she evacuated her flat, and she has, it was recorded as exiting the tower at 1:42 a.m.
Yes.
So again, that is a statement that I ask to be admitted into the record.
Yes, thank you.
The next statement I would ask to be put up on the screen, please, is at IWS 50856.
Yes.
This is the first statement of Lillian Olwer. If we go to page 5, please, we see it carries a statement of truth and is signed and dated the 1st of November 2018. There are no exhibits accompanying that statement, Sorry, I should the correct date. Sorry, if I do that again. It's page 5 of that statement.
Well, 6, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, 6. Yes, sir. My fault. Page 6 of that statement carries the date 29th of June 2018 and is signed and carries a statement of truth. The date I gave was to the second supplementary witness statement made by Miss Olwer, which is at IWS 401181. Thank you. If we go to page 5 in that statement, we see that it is this statement which carries the date 1st of November 2018 and signed and has a statement of truth. Again, I don't propose to read from either of these two statements, but in outline, Miss Olwer confirms that she was a resident of flat 71 of floor 10 of Grenfell Tower, and she was not present on the night of the fire itself.
Right.
And if I ask both statements to be admitted into the record, please.
Yes, thank you.
Could I now have, please, IWS 50330, first statement of Hind Raihani. If we go to page 5 of the statement, we see that it is signed, carries a statement of truth, and is dated the 21st of May 2018. We then have, if we please on the screen, IWS 401190.
Yes.
This is the second witness statement made by Miss Raihani. Again, if we go to the last page of that, page 4, that statement carries a statement of truth, is signed and is dated the 18th of October 2018. In her statements, neither of which is accompanied by an exhibit, Ms. Raihani has confirmed that she was a resident of flat 126 on floor 15 of Grenfell Tower, which at the time of the fire itself, but explains her movements on the night, and the two statements fall to be read together.
Yes.
I won't propose to read further from the statement, but again, ask both statements be admitted into the record.
Yes, very well, thank you.
Could I now have on the screen, please, IWS 401191. You'll remember the oral evidence of Dr. Naomi Lee.
Yes.
And Dr. Lee, on the night of the fire, was with her cousin, Chinshaun Lydia Liao,
yes.
Who has also made a statement to the inquiry. That statement was read into the record on the 29th of October. At the request of the inquiry, Ms. Liao has provided a supplementary statement to assist in relation to who the callers were on a particular audio recording.
Yes.
And in this statement that we have on the screen, she has identified herself as one of the callers on the transcript of the inquiry, of that recording. And if we turn to the second page, we see that in providing that statement, she signed and dated it. And so I ask for that supplementary statement to be placed into the record.
Yes, thank you.
The next statement I turn to is also a supplementary statement. It is at IWS 401188. This is a supplementary witness statement of Marion Telfer, and Miss Telfer is here today.
Right.
And can I just say, her first statement to the inquiry was read into the record on the 14th of November 2018.
Yes.
And Ms. Telfer is a relative of Khadija Say and her mother, who sadly died on the night of the fire. but she has assisted the inquiry further, and this was at the inquiry's request, by providing a supplementary statement, which we see here.
Yes.
And the statement carries a statement of truth, is signed and dated the 14th of November 2018. And again, whilst I'm not going to read from it, I want to explain the purpose of this statement. And Ms. Telfer has very helpfully exhibited two items. The first is a number of pages of social media messages which were on Khadija Say's Facebook wall on that night, and therefore show interactions that Khadija Say had with friends and relatives on that night. And the second is a document which very, very helpfully sets out the times at which those messages were placed.
Good. Yes, well, thank you very much. I think we ought to record our gratitude to Ms. Telfer for making that supplementary statement and providing the information which is so helpful.
It is, sir. Thank you. May I have a moment, please?
Yes, of course.
So I have two more statements to deal with today, but I've noted the time. They are of some length, because it's important that I read from these statements.
Yes.
So I'm in your hands.
Would it be better to break now?
Well, I will go longer than 15 minutes, so that may be the indication. It's
probably
better
would,
to break.
wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Right. Well, then we'll stop now and come back to these other statements after lunch at 2 o'clock.
Thank you, sir.
All right? Good. Thank you all very much. 2 o'clock then, please. Okay.